Welcome back. What you're about to hear aren't just stories, they're memories, echoing through the fog of war. Before we begin, like the video, subscribe and tell me where are you from and what time are you watching. Now, get comfortable. The rain is already falling, and the stories are on their way. Lieutenant Commander Jack Harrington, 34 years old. SEAL Team 3, Naval Special Warfare Group 1, born in Coronado, California. The goat stares at me with unblinking accusation, as if I'm personally responsible for interrupting its midnight stroll through a terrorist safe house. I stare back through my night vision goggles, the animal rendered in surreal green monochrome as it chews something unidentifiable in the corner of the room we've just breached. The target we've spent 3 days tracking, a courier for Al-Qaeda, in Iraq is nowhere to be seen, but his livestock apparently maintains a regular schedule. "You seeing this shit?" Chief Petty Officer Martinez whispers through our comms, his rifle trained professionally on the munching quadruped. "Target has 4 legs and a concerning lack of opposable thumbs," I respond dryly. "Unless al-Zawahiri's recruitment standards have really gone downhill, I think we've got the wrong room." Martinez stifles a laugh as we continue our methodical sweep of the mud brick house. 6 operators moving with practiced precision through each room, finding nothing but ordinary domestic scenes frozen in time. Dinner plates with half-eaten food, a television still quietly playing an Egyptian soap opera, beds with imprints of bodies that vacated them minutes before our arrival. We've missed them. Again. The 3rd time this week, our high-value targets have evaporated minutes before we arrived. Almost as if someone's calling ahead to announce that America's finest, special operators are dropping by for an unscheduled visit. "House is clear," reports Petty Officer Wilson from the back rooms. "Found fresh cigarette butts, still warm. They left in a hurry." I key my radio to update our command element waiting in the Black Hawk helicopters 2 kilometers away. "Bullseye? Actual, this is Bullseye 1. Target location is dry. Evidence suggests we missed them by minutes. Requesting guidance, over." The response comes back immediately. "Bullseye 1, this is actual. Secure the site for intelligence exploitation. SSE team inbound." "Roger that," I acknowledge, then turn to my team. "Looks like we're policing up phones and papers again, gentlemen. Try not to disturb the goat. He outranks all of us in the facial hair department." My men chuckle as they begin the tedious process of bagging everything that might yield intelligence value. Dark humor is our oxygen out here, the only sustainable response to the cosmic joke that special operations in Iraq has become. We're the most lethal fighting force ever assembled, armed with cutting-edge technology and supported by the full might of American intelligence agencies. Yet somehow we keep arriving just in time to interdict empty rooms and livestock. Welcome to the Bullseye Club, where the enemy always knows you're coming, the intelligence is always 20 minutes too late, and the only thing you can count on is that nothing will go according to plan. We're the tip of the spear, if the spear were being wielded by a nearsighted octopus with a drinking problem. I'd arrived in Iraq in March 2004 with the kind of patriotic fervor and tactical confidence that only a naval academy graduate with 2 previous combat deployments could muster. SEAL Team 3 had been tasked with high-value target operations throughout the Anbar province, hunting down the leadership elements of the burgeoning insurgency. The initial briefing at our forward operating base near Fallujah had painted a straightforward picture: identify insurgent leaders, develop actionable intelligence, execute precision raids, repeat until enemy command structure disintegrates. The PowerPoint slides made it seem so clinical and inevitable, as if the enemy would simply wait patiently for us to work our way down the organizational chart. Reality proved considerably less accommodating. Our first mission targeted a former Iraqi Republican Guard colonel reportedly coordinating attacks on coalition forces. After 3 days of planning and rehearsals, we infiltrated his supposed location, a farmhouse outside Ramadi, only to find it occupied by a bewildered family who claimed the colonel had moved 6 months earlier. "Well, that was special," remarked Senior Chief Reynolds as we extracted empty-handed. "Nothing says elite warriors like terrifying innocent civilians at 2 in the morning." The intelligence officer back at base was apologetic but undeterred. These things happen. Human intelligence is imperfect. We'll get better sources. By the third mission, a pattern was emerging. Our intelligence would identify a target location. We would plan meticulously, execute precisely, and find nothing. Or rather, evidence that our targets had been there but departed just before our arrival. The timing became so consistent it seemed deliberately orchestrated. Maybe we should try sending them formal invitations, suggested Martinez during a post-mission debrief. Dear Insurgent Leadership, the United States Navy SEALs request the honor of your presence for an all-expenses-paid extraordinary rendition. RSVP not required, as we'll find you anyway. Eventually. Probably. The dark humor was our way of processing. Mounting frustration. We were the supposed experts in clandestine operations, yet somehow our movements seemed telegraphed to the enemy with Swiss precision. The intelligence community cycled through explanations, coincidence, operational security leaks, enemy counterintelligence, without ever definitively identifying the issue. Our sixth mission finally yielded tangible results, though not the kind anyone celebrated. Acting on highly reliable intelligence, we raided a compound reportedly housing 3 Al-Qaeda in Iraq facilitators. The intelligence proved technically accurate. The targets were indeed there, but so was a wedding party with 50+ civilians. No shots were fired, no casualties incurred, but the tactical success was a strategic disaster. Photos of American operators interrupting a wedding circulated widely, becoming instant propaganda for the insurgency. The fact that we'd captured legitimate targets was lost in the avalanche of outrage about violated cultural norms and heavy-handed tactics. Congratulations, Lieutenant Commander Wilson, our squadron commander, told me afterward, with a grimace. You're now the wedding crashers of Anbar province. I hear the cake was excellent. The incident prompted a re-evaluation of our intelligence vetting process. More stringent verification requirements were implemented. Multiple source confirmation became mandatory. The percentage of missions greenlighted dropped by 60%, but the success rate of those conducted barely improved. By June, the frustration had evolved into a peculiar fatalism among the operators. We began referring to ourselves as the Bullseye Club, elite warriors whose arrival was apparently so predictable that the enemy could set their watches by it. You know what the definition of insanity is, right? Martinez asked one evening as we cleaned weapons after another dry hole mission. Doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results, Wilson replied automatically. No, Martinez corrected. Insanity is being a SEAL in Iraq. We train our entire careers to be invisible, unpredictable predators. Then we fly around in helicopters so loud they can hear us coming from 10 miles away, following intelligence that's distributed through an Iraqi government that leaks like a colander, conducting operations that require 15 layers of approval. He wasn't wrong. The nature of counterinsurgency operations in Iraq had transformed special operations from its traditional clandestine role into something far more compromised. We operated under intense scrutiny, with complex rules of engagement, surrounded by a population where distinguishing friend from foe was nearly impossible. The insurgents, meanwhile, operated with absolute freedom of action. They lived among the population. They had no authorization chains or operational security protocols to navigate. They could plan an attack over lunch and execute it by dinner. Our technological and training advantages were being systematically negated by the operational environment. In July, we experienced our first casualty. Petty Officer Second Class Thompson was severely wounded when an IED detonated during an extraction. As the medevac helicopter lifted off with Thompson aboard, Martinez verbalized what many were thinking. You know, somewhere right now there's an insurgent who knew exactly which route we'd take out, who had plenty of time to plant that device because someone tipped him off about our operation. The thought was simultaneously infuriating and demoralizing. The possibility that our own security protocols, our own Iraqi partners, our own operational patterns were endangering our operators was almost too much to bear. We adapted as best we could, changed insertion methods, varied extraction routes, compartmentalized information more rigorously. cultivated our own sources rather than relying entirely on intelligence community reporting. The adjustments yielded incremental improvements, but never fully resolved the fundamental challenge. By August, I'd led 23 special operations missions targeting insurgent leadership. 4 had resulted in successful captures. 2 had yielded useful intelligence but no targets. The remaining 17 had been dry holes, targets absent, warned, or never there to begin with. "You know what's truly ironic?" I remarked to Senior Chief Reynolds after a particularly frustrating mission. "The insurgents probably think we're geniuses. They see helicopters full of operators consistently arriving exactly 5 minutes after they leave. They must assume we have some incredible intelligence capability that allows us to always know where they've just been." "The world's most expensive historical society," Reynolds agreed with a sardonic grin, expertly documenting where terrorists used to be. Despite the gallows humor, we continued refining our approach. One breakthrough came when we began conducting simultaneous raids on multiple associated targets, correctly guessing that warning networks could only alert so many locations at once. Another came from drastically shortened planning cycles, moving from target identification to execution within hours rather than days, minimizing the window for leaks. Our success rate improved marginally, climbing to around 30% by September. Still far from ideal, but better than the statistical equivalent of a coin flip we'd been operating with previously. The most successful innovation, however, came from embracing the absurdity rather than fighting it. If our operations were inevitably compromised, why not use that to our advantage? We began deliberately leaking false target information while quietly preparing to hit the actual objective. We'd make obvious preparations for a raid in one sector, while stealthily positioning for the real mission elsewhere. "We're using our own incompetence as deception," Martinez observed with grudging admiration, after such a stratagem yielded 3 captured insurgent commanders. "That's either brilliant or deeply depressing." "Both," I replied. "Definitely both." By October, the Bullseye Club had evolved from a self-deprecating joke into a peculiar point of pride. We'd adapted to an impossible operational environment by embracing its contradictions. Our target deck had expanded to include not just insurgent leaders, but the warning networks that protected them. We'd identified key nodes in their counter-surveillance efforts and systematically dismantled them. Which brings me back to that goat, staring at me accusingly in the green phosphorescence of night vision. Even with our improved tactics, we still hit plenty of dry holes. The rhythm of special operations is like that. Periods of intense success punctuated by frustrating failures, all conducted under the surreal conditions of modern warfare. As we completed our site exploitation and prepared for extraction, Martinez approached with a satellite phone we'd found hidden beneath floorboards. "Jackpot," he said quietly. "Call log shows outgoing calls to 3 numbers on our watch list right when the helicopters would have been audible." I nodded. "Bag it and tag it. Signals intelligence can trace the connections." "Should we take the goat as a material witness?" he asked with mock seriousness. "He might crack under interrogation. Probably knows all the safe houses in the area." "Leave him," I replied. "But put him on the target deck. Clearly he's higher in the terrorist hierarchy than we thought. Probably a division commander at minimum, judging by the beard." As we moved toward our extraction point, I keyed my radio to update command. "Bullseye actual, this is Bullseye 1. Site exploitation complete. Negative on primary targets, but recovered electronic devices with potential intelligence value. Moving to exfil point now." "Roger, Bullseye 1, came the response. "We've got another target package ready when you return. Time sensitive, high confidence." I couldn't help but smile beneath my balaclava. High confidence was the intelligence community's eternal promise, always offered, rarely fulfilled. Yet we would go again, and again after that, because occasionally we did make a difference. Occasionally the intelligence was accurate, the timing perfect, the execution flawless. Those moments made the absurdity worthwhile. "Copy that," I responded. Bullseye 1 returning to base, ready to do the impossible. Again, as our team moved through the darkness toward the waiting helicopters, I reflected on the strange reality of special operations in Iraq. We were simultaneously the most lethal fighting force on the planet and the victims of an operational environment that seemed designed to negate our every advantage. We were apex predators operating in an ecosystem that had evolved specific defenses against us. The absurdity of our situation wasn't unique to special operations, or to Iraq specifically. It was merely the most concentrated expression of the fundamental contradiction of modern warfare: exquisite capabilities repeatedly frustrated by complex human terrain. The technical perfection of our weapons, tactics, and training colliding with the messy imperfection of human conflict. Later that night, back at our forward operating base, the intelligence officer briefed us on our next target, another high-value individual allegedly located in another nondescript building in another contested village. Intelligence suggests he'll be at this location for the next 24 to 48 hours, the officer explained, pointing to satellite imagery. Multiple sources have confirmed. High confidence. Martinez caught my eye from across the room, both of us suppressing smiles. The phrases never changed, even as the targets and locations did. The eternal optimism of intelligence work. This time, surely this time, the information would prove accurate and timely. Questions? The intelligence officer asked. Just one, I replied. Does the target have any goats? Because if so, we should really bring some additional operators. Those things are slippery. The room erupted in laughter, the kind that only comes from shared absurdity and the peculiar brotherhood of special operations. Tomorrow we would plan meticulously, execute precisely, and quite possibly find another empty room with evidence of recent occupation. Or perhaps we'd get lucky and actually catch our quarry. Stranger things had happened. Either way, the Bullseye Club would continue its peculiar mission: hunting shadows, chasing ghosts, and occasionally, just occasionally, landing a solid punch against an enemy who seemed to have our playbook memorized. Not because we expected consistent success, but because the alternative was unacceptable. Special operations in Iraq taught me many things, but perhaps the most important was this: sometimes the only appropriate response to an absurd situation is to embrace the absurdity fully. To find humor in failure, persistence in frustration, and meaning in the rare moments when everything aligns perfectly. As I prepared for yet another mission, I thought of that accusatory goat and smiled. In the strange theater of Iraq, even the livestock seemed to understand the cosmic joke that counterterrorism had become. The least we could do was appreciate the punchline. Master Sergeant Nathan Cross, 31 years old, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, born in Manchester, New Hampshire. The target steps into my crosshairs at exactly 0817, completely unaware that he's already dead. All that remains is for physics to catch up with destiny. He's smoking a cigarette outside a crumbling apartment block in downtown Ramadi. Intel says he's an IED cell leader responsible for 11 American deaths. They always say that. Whether it's true or not, hardly matters anymore. No one asks for verification at this point in the war. I control my breathing, slowing my heart rate through thousands of hours of practice. The morning desert air is still cool, without the heat mirage that will make long shots nearly impossible by midday. Range to target, 627 meters. Humidity, 17%. Wind, negligible. Coriolis effect calculated. Bullet drop compensated. I begin applying pressure to the trigger of my SR-25. A gentle, steady squeeze that feels more intimate than a lover's caress. Time compresses as the firing pin travels forward. In this suspended moment between decision and consequence, I could philosophize about what I've become after 3 deployments. A precision instrument of death, a political tool, a remorseless killer. But such thoughts are luxuries for civilians and new recruits. Veterans know the only truth that matters. If I don't take the shot, someone else will. The rifle bucks against my shoulder. Through my scope, I watch the cigarette drop from suddenly lifeless fingers as the 7.62 millimeter round punches through his left eye socket. He crumples without drama, already cooling meat before his companions inside realize anything has happened. Another name to cross off a list that never seems to get shorter. Jackpot, I whispered to my spotter, who's already recording time of elimination and collecting brass. Target down. What I don't say is how little I feel. Not satisfaction, not remorse, not even the professional pride that used to accompany a difficult shot. Just nothing. A void where something human used to reside. They say snipers are the angels of the battlefield, delivering swift judgment from on high. If that's true, I'm certainly no angel of mercy. Perhaps angel of death, or just another demon in a war that's creating them by the thousands. 7 years earlier, I'd been a promising candidate in Special Forces selection. Distinguished marksman in Ranger Battalion with aspirations of joining the Army's most elite counter-terrorism unit. Back then, I still believed in concepts like duty, honor, and country, words that now taste like ash in my mouth. The Twin Towers fell during my final phase of Delta selection. 2 months later, I was hunting high-value targets in the mountains of Afghanistan. Afghanistan was simple in its own brutal way. Clear objectives, identifiable enemies, justifiable cause. Iraq was different from the start. Murky, complicated, a war built on shifting premises and fought against enemies who blended seamlessly into the civilian population. By the time I arrived for my first rotation in late 2003, the mission had already begun to drift from its original purpose, like a ship losing its mooring in a storm. "You're the best shot we've got," Lieutenant Colonel Morgan told me during my initial briefing at our forward operating base near Fallujah. "Your job is to create pressure on the insurgent leadership, make them afraid to show their faces, degrade their command and control capabilities." What went unsaid was how these operations would blur the lines between military action and assassination. Delta and SEAL Team 6 were being unleashed to conduct operations that existed in the shadowlands of military ethics. Precision killings meant to decapitate the insurgency while maintaining plausible deniability for the political leadership. Back home, my first Iraqi target was a former Ba'athist general who'd reportedly been coordinating attacks on coalition forces. We set up in an abandoned building across from his family compound, maintaining surveillance for 3 days. I watched through my scope as he played with his children in the courtyard, drank tea with visitors, knelt in prayer. I learned his routines, his habits, the rhythm of his life. On the 4th day, I took the shot as he walked to his car. 800 meters, crosswind at 4 knots, clean hit through the brainstem, no suffering. His driver screamed, his bodyguard frantically scanned surrounding buildings, and his family poured from the house as I quietly broke down my rifle and slipped away with my spotter. Back at base, there was no celebratory high-fiving or backslapping, just the quiet acknowledgement of mission completion and the assignment of a new target within hours. The machinery of war ground forward, indifferent to any individual's moral qualms. "How do you feel?" asked Jenkins, a fellow operator who'd been in country 2 months longer than me. "Fine," I replied automatically. "Bullshit," he said, not unkindly. "Nobody feels fine after their first. But here's what you need to know. Feeling bad doesn't save anyone, and feeling good makes you a psychopath. The only sustainable option is to feel nothing at all." By my second deployment in 2005, I'd perfected the art of emotional detachment. The insurgency had evolved, and so had our response. My targets were younger now, mid-level cell leaders, bomb makers, foreign fighters from Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. The kill list never shortened. For every target eliminated, 2 more appeared to take their place. "It's like mowing the grass," Captain Reeves remarked during one briefing. "You cut it down, but it keeps growing back." "Then why bother?" asked a newly arrived SEAL who would be killed 3 weeks later by an IED. "Because it's what we're here to do," Reeves answered with the resigned pragmatism that characterized leadership at that stage of the war. "And because every day we buy might give the political situation time to stabilize." But the political situation wasn't stabilizing. If anything, each high-profile killing seemed to escalate the cycle of violence. Sectarian tensions between Sunni and Shia intensified. Al-Qaeda in Iraq gained traction. Coalition forces were caught in the middle of what increasingly resembled a civil war. During a rare joint operation with a SEAL Team 6 element in Mosul, I found myself partnered with Chief Petty Officer Rollins, a veteran sniper with an almost supernatural ability to read wind conditions. "You know what I can't figure out?" he said, as we maintained surveillance on a suspected meeting house. "Whether what we're doing is making things better or worse." "Above our pay grade," I replied, the stock answer for uncomfortable questions. "Maybe. But I've put down 67 confirmed enemies, and the situation only seems to be deteriorating. Makes a man wonder." "Wondering is dangerous in this line of work," he chuckled softly. "That's why they select for intelligence, but train for obedience." The operation yielded 4 confirmed kills, mid-level Al-Qaeda facilitators taken out with synchronized shots as they exited the building. Tactically flawless, strategically questionable. The pattern of our war. By my 3rd deployment in 2007, the disillusionment was complete. The surge was underway, thousands of additional troops flooding into the country in a last-ditch effort to stabilize the security situation. For Special Operations Forces, this meant an even more aggressive campaign against insurgent leadership. We operated primarily out of Baghdad and Ramadi, conducting surveillance and precision strikes against high-value targets. My rifle of choice had evolved to the SR-25, a semi-automatic platform that allowed faster follow-up shots when necessary. My personal count stood at 43 confirmed kills in Iraq alone, a number that brought neither pride nor shame, just a detached professional acknowledgement. The routine became mechanical. Receive target package, study patterns of life, set up hide site, take the shot, exfil, debrief, repeat. The faces of the dead blurred together in my memory, a gallery of final expressions ranging from surprise to vacancy. I stopped seeing them in my dreams, which somehow seemed worse than nightmares. "You've got ice water in your veins, Cross," remarked Major Sanderson after I eliminated a particularly difficult target through a partially obscured window at over 700 meters. "Best shooter I've ever worked with." I nodded, accepting the compliment without emotion. What he perceived as composure was actually something closer to spiritual death. The complete erosion of the part of me that connected actions to consequences, that understood the weight of ending another human life. In rare moments of clarity, usually after a few drinks in the relative safety of the green zone, I would try to articulate this transformation to my closest teammates. "You know what's fucked up?" I asked Staff Sergeant Miller one night. "I feel more when I miss a shot than when I make one. Professional pride still registers. Human empathy doesn't." "That's because you're a weapon, not a person," he replied, his voice carrying the flat affect that characterized so many veterans of multiple deployments. "They've weaponized your existence. The question is whether they can unweaponize you when you go home." Home became an increasingly abstract concept. My marriage had collapsed during my 2nd deployment, a casualty of extended absence and my inability to communicate what I was experiencing. My parents had died in a car accident while I was overseas. The America I returned to between deployments felt foreign and trivial, obsessed with celebrities and consumer goods while we fought, and died in forgotten corners of the world. The sniper community was the only place I felt understood. We shared a peculiar burden. Unlike other soldiers who might kill in the chaos of close combat, our actions were calculated, deliberate, and intensely personal. We studied our targets for days, learned their habits, and then executed them from positions of complete advantage. There was no possibility of claiming battlefield confusion or split-second decision-making. We chose to end lives with premeditation and precision. "The Romans used to make executioners wear hoods," said Rollins, during another joint operation, not to protect the executioner's identity, but to preserve his humanity. "We don't get hoods." "Would you wear one if offered?" I asked. "Fuck no," he laughed. "But I understand the wisdom behind it." In April 2007, I was assigned to eliminate a high-ranking member of Muqtada al-Sadr's Mahdi army, who had allegedly been coordinating attacks on coalition forces. The intel was questionable at best, circumstantial evidence and single-source reporting, but the political pressure to disrupt Shia militia operations was intense. We set up in an abandoned textile factory with line of sight to the targets, known residents. For 3 days, we maintained surveillance, watching the comings and goings of various individuals. The target appeared sporadically, always surrounded by security personnel and civilian followers. "This guy's practically a neighborhood mayor," muttered Evans, my spotter. "Look at how the locals interact with him. They're bringing him their problems, not their bomb-making materials." "Not our call," I reminded him, though I shared his skepticism. On the 4th day, authorization for the kill came through. The target was in his courtyard, talking with several elderly men, a community council of some sort. Children played nearby. The shot was clear, but the consequences of taking it in front of civilians would be significant. "Control, this is Stalker," I radioed back to our Tactical Operations Center. "Target is surrounded by non-combatants, including minors. Requesting permission to delay until target is isolated." The response was immediate and unambiguous. "Stalker, this is Control. You are cleared hot." I repeat, cleared hot. Priority target. Execute. Evans looked at me, his expression hidden behind his ballistic sunglasses, but his tension evident in the set of his jaw. "Your call, shooter." In that moment, something fractured in my carefully constructed professional detachment. Not us. Compassion or mercy, those had been educated out of me years before. Rather, a sudden bitter clarity about the machinery I was part of and my role within it. I was not the surgeon removing cancer from the body of Iraq. I was simply another toxin being injected into its veins, contributing to a cycle of violence. That served purposes I no longer understood or believed in. I took the shot. The target dropped where he stood. The courtyard erupted in chaos. Women screaming, men diving for cover, children frozen in terror. Through my scope, I watched as the community I'd been observing for days was transformed by a single bullet from my rifle. Not collateral damage. In the physical sense, the shot was clean, but a psychological devastation inflicted with surgical precision. "Target down," I reported mechanically. "Stalker exfiltrating." We withdrew without incident, returned to base, and debriefed. Within hours, I was reviewing the file for my next target. The war machine continued its inexorable functioning, indifferent to my private crisis of faith. 2 weeks later, intelligence reports confirmed what I had suspected. The target had indeed been a community leader, but one working to reduce sectarian tensions in his neighborhood. His elimination created a power vacuum that was quickly filled by more radical elements. Indirect fire attacks from that district against coalition positions increased by 60% in the following month. I said nothing, did nothing, continued accepting target packages and eliminating human beings with mechanical efficiency. The perfect weapon, functioning as designed even after recognizing the fundamental flaws in its deployment. Which brings me back to that morning in Ramadi, watching a cigarette fall from lifeless fingers. Another name crossed off an endless list. Another link in a chain of causation that would likely make the situation worse rather than better. "We should move," my spotter urges, already packing up equipment. "Counter-sniper teams will be all over this sector within minutes." I break down, my rifle with practiced efficiency, each movement automatic after years of repetition. We exit the building through a pre-planned route, blending into the morning traffic of a city that has learned to continue functioning, even as death visits randomly from above. Back at our forward operating base, I clean my weapon, submit my after-action, report, and begin reviewing the file for tomorrow's target. The machinery of war grinds forward. I am a cog, nothing more, a specialized tool designed for a specific purpose. What I don't record in any official document is my growing certainty that we are caught in a self-perpetuating cycle of violence, creating enemies faster than we can eliminate them. The strategic incoherence of our presence in Iraq has filtered down to the tactical level, leaving even the most committed operators questioning the purpose of our actions. "You know what's ironic?" I asked no one in particular in the team room later that evening. "Snipers are supposed to be the most precise application of military force. One shot, one kill, surgical, minimal collateral damage." "So," responds Williams, a junior operator recently assigned to our unit. "So nothing about this war is precise. We're performing microsurgery in the middle of a train wreck." He looks uncomfortable with this line of thought, still new enough to believe in the mission. I envy him that temporary clarity, knowing it can't last. Later, alone in my bunk, I reflect on what I've become after all these deployments. Not the noble warrior I'd imagined in my youth. Not the defender of American ideals. Just a mechanical component in a vast apparatus of violence whose purpose has become obscured even to those directing it. Tomorrow, I'll wake up, receive a new target package, and eliminate another human being with the detached precision that has become my hallmark. I'll do this because it's what I've been trained for, because it's what's expected, and because I've lost the capacity to imagine any alternative. One shot, one kill, one more link in a chain that stretches beyond my vision in both directions. The perfect weapon continues to function, even after recognizing its own moral obsolescence. In the darkness, I field strip my rifle one more time, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. The war continues, with or without my belief in it. And I continue too, a sniper without illusions and a war built on them. Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood, 34 years old. EOD team attached to 5th Special Forces Group, born in Portland, Maine. The IED sat nestled between a child's stuffed animal and a crumpled soda can. Just another piece of trash along the roadside, except this particular piece would vaporize our Humvee if we drove past it. I lay belly down on the scorching asphalt, the heat radiating through my bomb suit. Sweat ran in rivulets down my face, pooling around my eyes and soaking my collar. Through the scratched visor of my helmet, I could see the device clearly now. Primary charge, approximately 4 kilograms of military-grade C4. Initiator, passive infrared sensor, likely to detect vehicle heat signatures. Secondary anti-handling switch visible under the main charge, but it was the tertiary trigger that concerned me most. A barely visible filament running beneath the device, designed to complete the circuit if the bomb was moved. "What's the situation, Blackwood?" Captain Erickson's voice crackled through my headset. "Multiple triggers, sir," I replied, keeping my breathing steady even as my heart hammered in my chest. "Definitely not local work. This has foreign technical signature all over it." "Timer?" he asked, the single word pregnant with urgency. "Negative on visible timer, but I'm reading a cell phone component. Could be remote detonation capability." 8 seconds passed in silence. 8 seconds where the only sound was my own breathing inside the helmet. 8 seconds where I stared at what amounted to a physics problem with lethal consequences. "Recommendation?" Erickson asked finally. I studied the device once more, noting the careful placement of the components. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. A deadly puzzle built by someone who understood the psychology of EOD technicians. Someone who knew we'd be here, doing exactly what I was doing now. "I can disarm it," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had fully processed them. "But I need everyone back 200 meters, and someone needs to jam all cell frequencies. Now." The adrenaline was still coursing through my system 3 hours later, as our convoy pulled into Forward Operating Base Falcon, just south of Baghdad. My hands had the subtle tremor they always did after a successful disposal, a delayed reaction to stress that I'd come to recognize as a sign I was still alive. The 5 improvised explosive devices we'd neutralized along Route Mar. Irish would never claim an American soldier or an Iraqi civilian, at least not today. The EOD facility was a Spartan affair, essentially a reinforced shipping container that housed our equipment, technical manuals, and a makeshift workshop where we could safely examine recovered components. I placed the disassembled cell phone trigger mechanism on the workbench and began photographing it from multiple angles. Technical Sergeant Wilson, my number 2, leaned against the door frame, his face still grimy from the day's work. "That's the 3rd cell phone trigger this week with the same modification pattern," he observed. "Someone's been teaching the locals new tricks." I nodded, focusing my camera on the soldering points where additional wires had been attached to the phone's vibration motor. The question is who, I replied. This isn't amateur hour. The person designing these knows exactly what they're doing. Wilson wiped sweat from his brow with a faded bandana. Could be those two Iranian IRGC officers' third group captured last month near Najaf. Maybe, I conceded, though something about the technical precision suggested otherwise. But this doesn't match known Iranian TTP. The soldering is too clean, the circuit design too elegant. Captain Erickson entered, ducking his head under the low doorframe. At 6'4", he was an imposing figure, even in the relatively light combat load he wore as our team leader. The former Ranger had transferred to 5th Group 2 years earlier, and had handpicked me to lead the EOD element supporting his operations. Good work out there today, Blackwood, he said, setting his M4 on the weapons rack. 5 IEDs, 0 casualties. I'd call that a win. Until tomorrow when there'll be 5 more, I replied, placing a small digital caliper against the triggering mechanism and recording the measurements in my notebook. This is starting to look like a coordinated campaign, sir. Same signatures, same explosive composition, strategic placement along convoy routes. Erickson studied the fragments laid out on the workbench, his expression somber. Intel suggests we've got a new player in town, he said quietly. Someone they're calling the engineer, supposedly ex-Russian military with explosives expertise, been training cell leaders in Baghdad and Fallujah. I looked up from my examination. That would explain a lot, sir. Which is why we've got new orders, Erickson continued. We're moving out at 0400. Link up with Iraqi Special Operations Forces. We've got a lead on a bomb-making workshop in Sadr City. I nodded, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. Sadr City was a notorious Mahdi army stronghold, a dense urban maze where Americans were about as welcome as a plague. But if we could locate and eliminate a bomb factory, we might save hundreds of lives. I'll prep the EOD kit, I said, already mentally inventorying what we'd need. Portable X-ray, full electronic suite, disruptor charges. Pack light, Erickson advised. We're going in quiet. 2 vehicles, minimalist footprint. After he left, Wilson let out a low whistle. Sadr City, at night, with a skeleton crew. What could possibly go wrong? I smiled grimly as I began preparing our equipment. Everything, Wilson. Everything could go wrong. At 0330, I was double-checking my gear in the pre-dawn darkness. The bomb suit would stay behind, too bulky and conspicuous for this operation. Instead, I wore standard tactical gear. Plate carrier with front and back ceramic inserts, helmet with night vision mount, Kevlar gauntlets to protect my hands, and a chest rig holding specialized EOD tools. My primary weapon was an MP5 with suppressor, quiet and manageable in tight spaces. The secondary was a Sig Sauer P226 in a drop holster. My most important equipment, however, filled the backpack in specialized pouches. A portable X-ray system for seeing inside suspicious packages, electronic countermeasures to prevent remote detonation, minimal explosive charges for controlled detonations, specialized cutting tools, and a compact robot for reconnaissance and manipulation of devices in confined spaces. Wilson approached, similarly equipped but carrying different components of our EOD suite. Robot ready? I asked. He nodded. Battery at 98%. Camera operating, manipulator arm calibrated. Good, I replied, securing the last of my equipment. Keep it close. I have a feeling we're going to need it. We joined the rest of the team at the vehicles, 2 modified Humvees, with minimal armor to reduce noise and increase speed. Captain Erickson and 3 other Special Forces operators comprised the assault element. Wilson and I would handle any explosive devices. 2 more SF operators would provide security. Latest intel confirms the target location, Erickson briefed. Us, pointing to a satellite image illuminated by red light to preserve our night vision. 3-story apartment building in eastern Sadr City. Top floor has been observed receiving materials consistent with bomb-making activities. Our ISOF partners will meet us here. He indicated a position 3 blocks away, and provide additional security and local language capability. The drive to the rendezvous point was tense but uneventful. We traveled without headlights, using our night vision instead. The streets were largely deserted at this hour, though occasionally we passed small groups of men smoking or talking, in hushed voices, every one of them a potential spotter for insurgent forces. The Iraqi Special Operations Forces were waiting as planned, 12 operators in 2 vehicles, led by a Captain Nazari, whom Erickson seemed to know from previous operations. After a brief exchange, our combined force moved toward the target building. We stopped 200 meters away, and Erickson turned to me. "Blackwood, I want you to send your robot in first. Get eyes on the apartment. Look for booby traps. IEDs? Any sign of the workshop?" I nodded, already unpacking the robot. A Foster Miller Talon, modified for our specific needs. The tracked vehicle was about the size of a small coffee table, but weighed nearly 100 pounds with all its attachments. Its manipulator arm could lift objects up to 20 pounds, and its 4 cameras gave us a comprehensive view of its surroundings. "Wilson, spot me," I said, powering up the control unit. The small screen flickered to life, showing the robot's forward view. With practiced movements, I guided it forward, keeping to shadows where possible. The Talon moved almost silently, its rubber tracks barely audible against the pavement. We'd almost reached the building when the robot's thermal camera detected a heat signature. "Movement," I whispered, adjusting the camera. "Single male, northeast corner of the building, smoking. Sentry?" Erickson asked, peering over my shoulder at the screen. "Possibly," I replied, "or just a resident with insomnia." We waited 5 agonizing minutes until the man finished his cigarette and went back inside. Then I guided the robot to the building's entrance and up the stairs. The Talon's track struggled with the steeper sections, but it maintained traction. On the 3rd floor, I slowed the robot's advance. If there were booby traps, this is where we'd find them. The thermal sensors showed 3 heat signatures in the apartment, all stationary, likely sleeping. "I'm going to check the door," I whispered, maneuvering the robot closer. The camera zoomed in, revealing a thin wire running across the doorframe at ankle height. "Tripwire," I said, "connected to something inside." "Can you see what?" Erickson asked. I shook my head. "Not from this angle. I need to get the fiber optic camera under the door." Carefully, I extended the robot's specialized probe, a flexible camera no thicker than a pencil. With delicate movements, I slid it under the door gap and into the apartment. The image was dark but clear enough to make out several large containers, workbenches covered with electronics, and what appeared to be a half-assembled suicide vest. But what caught my attention was the tripwire's connection, a simple mechanical pull fuse attached to a large charge positioned beside what looked like several artillery shells. "We've got a major problem," I said quietly. "The door is rigged to a significant secondary device. From what I can see, enough explosive to bring down half the building." Erickson's expression hardened. "Can you disarm it?" I studied the setup, considering angles and access points. "Not remotely? I'd need direct access, and opening the door triggers the device." "Options?" I thought for a moment. "We could breach through a window or wall, but there might be secondary devices. Or we wait for them to leave and intercept." Erickson conferred briefly with Captain Nazari, then turned back to me. "Intel suggests they're moving materials tonight. We don't have time to wait them out. What about the window?" I maneuvered the robot back down the hallway, looking for another approach. At the end of the corridor was a window that might offer a view of the apartment from outside. "I'm going to check the exterior," I said, guiding the Talon back down the stairs. Outside, I positioned the robot to look up at the 3rd floor windows. 2 were illuminated by faint light. Adjusting the zoom, I could make out movement. Inside, someone was awake. "What are your thoughts?" Erickson asked after I reported this observation. I considered our options, weighing risks against the mission objective. "I need to get eyes directly on that apartment from the outside. If I can see how the charges are arranged, I might be able to develop a plan to neutralize them." "Too exposed," Erickson objected. "You'd be a sitting duck on that fire escape. Not..." "If I go from above," I replied. "The building next door has roof access. I could cross over, work my way down, and examine the window setup without being spotted from inside." After brief deliberation, Erickson approved the plan. Wilson would maintain control of the robot while I made the approach from above. 2 SF operators would accompany me for security. Climbing to the adjacent rooftop was relatively straightforward. The building's fire escape was poorly maintained but functional. Once on the roof, we moved silently to the edge overlooking our target building. The gap was about 2 meters, manageable with a controlled jump. After verifying that the target roof would support my weight, I made the jump, landing in a crouch and freezing in place to listen for any reaction from inside. Nothing. The 2 operators followed, their movements barely audible. We crept to the edge of the roof where a drainage pipe offered a route down to the 3rd floor windows. With a rope secured around my waist and one of the operators anchoring me, I began the descent, my feet finding purchase against the building's rough exterior. The window was partially open, a stroke of luck. Through the narrow gap, I could see the apartment interior more clearly now. What I saw confirmed our intelligence and raised the stakes significantly. This wasn't just a workshop, it was a full-scale production facility. Workbenches held dozens of partially assembled devices. Components were sorted in clearly labeled containers. And most concerning, I counted at least 20 kilograms of military-grade explosive. I keyed my radio. "Erickson, we've hit the jackpot. This is definitely our target. Multiple devices in various stages of assembly. 3 tangos visible, all armed. Assess the door booby trap," he replied. "Can we breach without setting it off?" I shifted, positioned to get a better angle on the door mechanism. The tripwire led to a simple pull fuse, primitive but effective. The fuse in turn was connected to a detonation cord that ran to the larger charge. The door trap uses a mechanical trigger, I reported. No electronics, no delay mechanism. If the door opens even an inch, it pulls the fuse. But there's a way around it. I'm listening. The fuse pin needs about 4 pounds of pressure to activate. If we can secure the pin in place before opening the door, we can prevent detonation. I can rig a temporary safety using a microfilament clamp from my kit. "Risk assessment?" Erickson asked, his way of asking if I thought it would work. "Medium to high," I admitted. "But it's our best option for preserving evidence and capturing the occupants." After a brief pause, Erickson made his decision. "Do it. We'll set up for breach once you secure the device." Climbing back up to the roof, I rejoined the team and explained what needed to happen. Wilson would accompany me to assist with the disarming process while the assault team prepared to breach immediately after we secured the trigger. 10 minutes later, we were outside the apartment door. I knelt beside the jamb, carefully inserting specialized tools to access the tripwire without disturbing it. The fiber optic camera gave me a clear view of the mechanism. With precise movements, I maneuvered a clamp around the fuse pin, securing it in place. A microfilament wire allowed me to tighten the clamp remotely. "Clamp is secure," I whispered, testing the tension. "The pin won't move when the wire is pulled." "Breach in 3, Erickson said over the radio. 2, 1. The door exploded, inward as the assault team entered, their weapons up and voices shouting commands in Arabic and English. The tripwire pulled taut against my clamp, but the pin held. The explosives remained inert. What followed was controlled chaos. The 3 men inside were captured before they could reach their weapons. The apartment was secured room by room. And then came the painstaking process of documenting and securing every component, every tool, every scrap of evidence. Working methodically, I disarmed the door booby trap first, rendering it safe for the team to move freely. Then came the partially assembled devices, each one photographed, then carefully disassembled and packed for transport and analysis. By dawn, we had cleared the apartment of all explosive material and captured 3 bomb makers, including the one intelligence had identified as being trained by the engineer. The Hall of Intelligence, notebooks, diagrams, supply records, would keep analysts busy for weeks. As we prepared to transport the materials and prisoners back to base, Captain Erickson approached me, his expression uncharacteristically animated. "You know what you did tonight, right?" he asked. I shrugged, securing the last case of components. "My job, sir." According to the prisoners' initial questioning, they've built and deployed over 30 devices in the past month. Devices that match the ones we've been finding. He paused, letting the information sink in. That's potentially hundreds of lives saved, Blackwood. I nodded, feeling the familiar post-operation crash approaching as adrenaline faded. The weight of what might have happened had we not discovered that workshop settled on my shoulders. One mistake, a trembling hand, a moment of inattention, and the entire building might have gone up, taking us and dozens of civilians with it. As our convoy rolled back toward Fob Falcon in the early morning light, I watched Baghdad awaken around us. Vendors setting up stalls, children walking to school, people going about their lives, unaware of how close they'd come to another day of explosions and funerals. In my pack, securely wrapped and cushioned, sat the cell phone trigger mechanism I'd removed from the apartment. Tonight I would compare it to the ones we disarmed along Route Irish. Tonight I would continue the painstaking work of understanding our adversary. Tonight I would prepare to do it all again tomorrow. Because, in this war, my battlefield wasn't defined by geographical coordinates or strategic objectives. My battlefield existed in the minute details of wire gauge and chemical composition, in the subtle differences between a Russian-designed pressure plate and its Iranian copy, in the delicate architecture of circuits designed to deliver death, and, in that battlefield, inches from potential obliteration, I found a strange sort of clarity, a focus that made everything else, the politics, the strategic debates, even the fear, fade into background noise. There was only the device, the tools in my hands, and the absolute concentration required to separate life from death one wire at a time. Corporal James Reeves, 23 years old, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, 1st Marine Division, born in Springfield, Missouri. Every piece of trash could kill you. Every window might hide a shooter. Every civilian could be wearing a vest. The midday sun beats down mercilessly as I press my back against the pockmarked concrete wall, feeling the heat radiating through my body armor. Sweat streams down my face, stinging my eyes and blurring my vision. Across the narrow street, Lance, Corporal Diaz signals with his hand. Movement inside the building to our right. The rest of 2nd Squad has taken cover behind the burned-out husk of a taxi 30 meters ahead. It feels like we've been fighting door to door for weeks now, though it's only been 5 days since we entered Fallujah. 5 days of urban combat, more intense than anything the Marine Corps has seen since Hue City in Vietnam. 5 days of booby traps, ambushes, and the constant, oppressive feeling that someone is watching, waiting, calculating the perfect moment to strike. A metallic clink breaks the eerie silence, the sound unnaturally clear in the dead city air. My muscles tense instinctively as I recognize it immediately. A grenade pin. "Frag out!" I scream, lunging, forward to tackle Diaz as the world erupts into fire and shrapnel behind us. The explosion sends debris raining down as dust clouds billow through the narrow street. My ears ring painfully as I roll off Diaz, both of us scrambling for better cover as AK-47 fire erupts from multiple windows above. Time slows as I swing my M16 toward the nearest muzzle flash, the sound of my own heartbeat drowning out everything else. In this urban maze, death can come from any direction. Another day in Fallujah. Another moment where every shadow becomes a potential grave. We'd arrived in Kuwait back in March 2004. Operation Iraqi Freedom was entering its 2nd year, and insurgent activity was escalating throughout the country. The battalion had conducted various operations in the Al-Anbar province, but it was clear from the beginning that Fallujah represented something different. A stronghold, a symbol of resistance that drew foreign fighters and hardened Iraqi insurgents like moths to a flame. By April, the assassination and mutilation of 4 Blackwater contractors had triggered the First Battle of Fallujah. The fighting was fierce but ultimately indecisive. Political concerns had halted operations before the city could be fully secured. We watched from our positions elsewhere in Iraq as the insurgents claimed victory and transformed Fallujah into their fortress. As summer turned to fall, intelligence reports painted an increasingly grim picture. Fallujah had become a factory of death. IEDs and car bombs flowed from the city to target coalition forces throughout the region. Foreign, Fighters poured in from Syria and other neighboring countries. Mosques were converted to weapons caches and command centers. The decision was made. Fallujah had to be taken, building by building, street by street. "This is going to be some serious shit," Staff Sergeant Wilson told us during a pre-operation briefing in late October. "They've had months to prepare. Every street will be mined or booby-trapped. Every building a potential strong point. This isn't like anything we've seen before." The night before the assault began, our platoon gathered in a tight circle. Some wrote letters home. Others cleaned their weapons for the 100th time. Kowalski, our squad's saw gunner, was methodically arranging his ammunition belts, face expressionless, but hands trembling slightly. "You know what fucking bothers me?" he said suddenly. "It's not knowing where they are. Give me a straight-up fight any day. But this urban shit, they could be anywhere. Watching us right now, planning. It's like fighting ghosts, Staff Sergeant." Wilson overheard him. "That's exactly what makes you careful, Marine. That's what keeps you alive. The moment you stop feeling that, the moment you get comfortable, that's when they've got you." The assault began on November 7th. Our battalion was tasked with clearing the northeastern sector of the city. The fighting started before we even entered. Artillery and airstrikes pounding insurgent positions throughout the night. By dawn, massive clouds of smoke hung over Fallujah, giving the entire landscape an apocalyptic appearance. We moved in behind the Abrams tanks of the Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Their massive bulk provided cover as we advanced, their 120mm main guns demolishing any building that offered significant resistance. The initial push went more smoothly than expected. Many insurgents had retreated, deeper into the city, rather than face the combined firepower of tanks and Marines. But by the second day, we'd reached the older sections of Fallujah. Narrow streets, ancient buildings with walls 3 feet thick, alleyways barely wide enough for a man to pass sideways. The tanks couldn't navigate many of these areas, which meant we were increasingly on our own, clearing buildings room by room, never knowing what waited on the other side of each door. That's when the true nature of urban combat revealed itself. The insurgents had created an interconnected network throughout the city. They'd punched mouse holes through adjacent buildings, allowing them to fire from one position, then quickly retreat to another without exposing themselves. They'd rigged doors with grenades, placed pressure plate IEDs under rugs, and positioned snipers in the most unexpected locations. Our platoon lost 3 Marines that second day, 2 to a hidden IED in what appeared to be an abandoned home. The third to a sniper who'd somehow positioned himself inside a minaret, despite the prohibition against using mosques as fighting positions. The knowledge that the enemy didn't play by any recognizable rules of engagement created a constant, grinding anxiety that wore on everyone. By day 4, we'd advanced just 8 blocks into our sector. 8 blocks of intense, building-to-building fighting. 8 blocks that had cost us 5 dead and 11 wounded. The battalion radio frequency was filled with similar reports from other companies: slow progress, stiff resistance, mounting casualties. That night, as we established a hasty perimeter in a partially destroyed school building, I found myself unable to sleep despite 36 hours of continuous operations. Every sound, the creaking of a door in the wind, the distant crack of a rifle, snapped me to full alertness. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. "First time I've seen you rattled, Reeves," said Diaz, who'd taken up position near me by a shattered window. His normally jovial face was streaked with grime and stubble, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "They're always watching," I replied quietly. "Even when we can't see them. Feels like they know our every move before we make it." Diaz nodded. "My cousin fought in Panama, Operation Just Cause. Said urban fighting was the worst. But at least, there, they were mostly facing regular army troops. These guys, they're like fucking ghosts. They disappear into the population, into the buildings themselves. How do you fight what you can't see?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. How indeed. Morning brought new orders. Our platoon was to push eastward along a main avenue, clearing buildings on both sides to establish a corridor for follow-on forces. Intelligence suggested moderate resistance, but as we'd all learned, intelligence in urban combat was often worth less than the paper it was printed on. Within the first hour, we'd cleared 6 buildings without incident. The absence of resistance was almost more unsettling than contact. The city felt like it was holding its breath, watching us, waiting. The 7th building was a 3-story structure that had once been a bank. As 2nd Squad approached the entrance, Staff Sergeant Wilson held up his fist, the signal to halt. "Something's not right," he said, scanning the building's facade. "This is too easy." He directed Kowalski to fire a burst from his M249 into each of the ground floor windows. The heavy machine gun rounds punched through the glass and concrete, sending clouds of dust billowing into the street. No return fire came. "Griner, Williams, check the door for booby traps," Wilson ordered. The 2 Marines approached cautiously, examining the entrance for any signs of tampering. Finding none, they pushed the door open with the barrel of Griner's rifle. Nothing happened. "2nd Squad, move in and clear the ground floor," Wilson commanded. "1st and 3rd Squads provide security." As Diaz and I crossed the threshold into the darkened interior of the bank, that familiar sense of vulnerability intensified. The bank's lobby was a mess of overturned furniture and scattered papers. Sunlight filtered through the shattered windows, creating sharp contrasts between light and shadow. We moved methodically through the ground floor, rifles at the ready, every sense straining for any indication of threat. Room by room we cleared the space, finding nothing but abandoned offices and a ransacked vault. "First floor clear," reported Sergeant Thompson, our squad leader. "Moving to the 2nd floor." The stairwell was narrow and dark, a perfect ambush. Point. We ascended with agonizing slowness, covering each other's movement, constantly scanning for tripwires or pressure plates. The 2nd floor contained what appeared to be executive offices, more ransacked rooms, more empty spaces. Clearing the final room on the 2nd floor, I heard a faint scuffing sound from above, like something being dragged across the floor. I froze, signaling to Diaz, who was covering my movement. He nodded, having heard it too. "Movement on the 3rd floor," I whispered into my radio. "Hold position," came Wilson's reply. "We're sending 1st Squad up to reinforce." Minutes later, we began our ascent to the 3rd floor, now with 9 Marines instead of 4. The stairwell to the top floor was even narrower than the previous one, forcing us to move in single file, a tactical nightmare that had every nerve in my body screaming danger. As we reached the landing, Lance Corporal Peterson, who was on point, suddenly stopped and gestured frantically. Wires, nearly invisible in the dim light, crisscrossed the entrance to the 3rd floor. "Classic booby trap. EOD needs to clear this," Peterson whispered. Before we could call for the explosive ordnance disposal team, a deafening blast rocked. The building, not from the wires Peterson had spotted, but from somewhere below us. The stairwell filled with dust and smoke as the building shuddered violently. "Ambush! Ground floor!" came the panicked shout over the radio, followed by the unmistakable sound of intense gunfire. We were trapped. The insurgents had allowed us to move up to the 3rd floor, then sprung their trap, attacking the Marines we'd left to secure the ground level while simultaneously cutting off our means of reinforcing them or retreating. "There's an exit door at the end of this hallway," shouted Sergeant Thompson above the din of combat below. "We need to find another way down and flank these bastards." As we moved down the hallway toward the potential exit, a door to our right suddenly splintered, outward as rounds punched through from the other side. Diaz, who had been walking point, crumpled to the floor, blood spurting from his thigh where an AK round had found its mark between the ceramic plates of his body armor. I grabbed his drag handle and pulled him behind a concrete pillar as return. Fire from the rest of the squad peppered the door and surrounding wall. The firing from the room ceased momentarily, followed by the distinctive metallic sound of a grenade pin being pulled. The same sound I'd recognized days later in that narrow street. "Grenade!" someone shouted, and we all scrambled for cover as the explosive device bounced into the hallway. The blast was deafening in the confined space. My ears rang painfully as dust and debris rained down. Through the haze, I saw insurgents pouring from the room, firing wildly. 5 or 6 men dressed in a mixture of civilian clothes and military gear, faces covered with keffiyehs. What followed was 30 seconds of the most intense close-quarters combat imaginable. In spaces sometimes no more than an arm's length apart, we fought for our lives. I emptied an entire magazine at a fighter no more than 10 feet away, the muzzle flash of my rifle momentarily blinding in the dusty air. Marine training took over. Mechanical movements burned into muscle memory through countless drills. Aim, center mass, double tap, switch targets, check your corners, watch your six. Each action performed without conscious thought, the human mind disconnected from the mechanical process of dealing death. When it ended, 4 insurgents lay dead in the hallway. One Marine, Lance Corporal Miller, had taken a round through his throat and was gurgling his last breaths as our corpsman worked desperately to save him. The rest of us were in various states of injury from grenade fragmentation and gunshot wounds. Diaz was conscious but pale from blood loss, a tourniquet cinched tight around his upper thigh. "Did we get 'em all?" he asked through gritted teeth. "For now," I replied, helping the corpsman bandage a shrapnel wound on another Marine's. "Wait, but there'll be more. There's always more." The radio crackled with updates from the ground floor. The ambush there had been repelled, with 3 Marines wounded but none killed. The explosion we'd heard had been a pre-placed charge designed to collapse part of the stairwell, temporarily cutting off reinforcements. As we secured our position and treated our casualties, the reality of urban combat in Fallujah crystallized in my mind. This wasn't a battle against a visible enemy with clear front lines. It was psychological warfare, a contest of wills played out in a 3-dimensional labyrinth where the enemy knew every hiding place, every escape route, every vantage point. They didn't need to win direct firefights, they just needed to make us fear every room, every window, every civilian, until that fear either broke us or made us lash out indiscriminately. The remainder of the battle for Fallujah unfolded in similar fashion, block by block, house by house, room by room. Some days we'd advance hundreds of meters with minimal resistance. Other days, we'd spend 12 hours clearing a single building complex. The human toll mounted steadily. By the time the city was declared secure in mid-December, the battalion had suffered 17 killed and over 80 wounded. Throughout it all, that sense of urban paranoia never diminished. If anything, it intensified as we learned the hard way just how ingeniously deadly the urban battlefield could be. Marines who survived developed a sixth sense, an almost supernatural ability to detect when something wasn't right. A pile of rubble that looked too deliberate, a room that seemed too clean amidst the destruction, a street unnaturally empty of the stray dogs that roamed everywhere else. Those who didn't develop this sense didn't last long, which brings me back to that moment on the narrow street, 5 days into the battle. After the grenade explosion and the ambush that followed, our squad managed to fight through to link up with the rest of the platoon. Diaz took another round, this time in his armor plate, knocking the wind out of him but leaving him otherwise uninjured. We lost Kowalski to a sniper who fired exactly once, from somewhere we never identified, before disappearing back into the urban terrain. As we consolidated our position that evening in the hollowed-out shell of what had once been an apartment building, Staff Sergeant Wilson gathered the platoon around him. His face, like all of ours, was etched with exhaustion and the 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing too much death in too short a time. "I know what you're all feeling," he said quietly. "The city is watching us. Every window, every doorway, every alley feels like it's going to erupt with fire. You're not wrong to feel that way. That paranoia, that hypervigilance, that's keeping you alive." He paused, looking each of us in the eye before continuing. "But don't let it consume you. The human mind isn't built to sustain that level of alertness indefinitely. Trust your training, trust your brothers, and remember that for all their advantages, the enemy is feeling the same thing. They're watching shadows too." Later that night, as I took my turn on watch, I gazed out over the shattered cityscape of Fallujah. Fires burned in distant sectors, where fighting was still ongoing. Illumination rounds cast an eerie, shifting light across the urban terrain. Somewhere out there, invisible enemies were planning, watching, waiting. The fear remained, that constant companion of urban combat. But alongside it now was something else, a grim determination. This city of ghosts had claimed too many good Marines. We would clear every room, check every corner, neutralize every threat. Not because we weren't afraid, but because we refused to let that fear define us. Urban combat teaches you that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important than fear. For us in those blood-soaked streets of Fallujah, that something was each other. We would walk through this paranoia-inducing hell because the Marine to our left and right was doing the same, and we could not, let them down. The battle for Fallujah continued for days afterward, but something changed in me after that night. The fear didn't disappear. If anything, experience only confirmed how justified it was. But it no longer controlled me. I had made peace with the reality that in urban combat, death could come from anywhere, at any time. Without warning, all I could do was stay alert, trust my training, and look out for my fellow Marines. In an environment designed to induce paranoia, that clarity of purpose was perhaps the only thing that kept us sane. The city of ghosts had tried its best to break us. It claimed many good men. But in the end, those of us who walked out did so, with our humanity intact, changed forever, but not destroyed. That perhaps was victory enough. Staff Sergeant Michael Callahan, 28 years old, 184th Ordnance Battalion, EOD, attached to 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 101st Airborne Division, born in Tacoma, Washington. The heat radiating from the asphalt is a physical force against my body as I move forward in the bomb suit. 127 degrees Fahrenheit outside, at least 20 degrees hotter inside the 84-pound protective cocoon I'm sealed within. Sweat cascades down my face, pooling at my collar before soaking through my undergarments. Each breath comes shallow and labored through the forced air respirator that's struggling to keep up with the demands of my exertion. Movement. 200 meters north, military-aged male with a cell phone. Comes the disembodied voice of Sergeant Pierce through my headset. He's watching from the turret of our up-armored Humvee through a 20-power spotting scope. I freeze mid-step. 100, 12 feet from the suspect device. Through my helmet visor, heat waves distort my vision of the tan Toyota Corolla with its trunk half open. Exactly as reported by the infantry patrol that discovered it 30 minutes ago. Beside the vehicle is a shallow depression in the road. Classic sign of a recently patched hole where a secondary device might wait. Hold position, I reply, my voice sounding alien even to myself. Describe subject. Red shirt, jeans, baseball cap, moving west to east along the cross street, still has phone to ear. My heart rate, already elevated from heat and exertion, notches higher. The explosive ordnance disposal technician's worst nightmare. A potential trigger man watching his handiwork, while I approach his device. I've lost friends to exactly this scenario. VBIDE with possible command detonation, I report clinically, using the military acronym for Vehicle-Borne Improvised Explosive Device. Radio jammers to full spectrum, alert QRF to potential trigger man. As I stand perfectly still in the killing zone, I perform the mental calculations that have become second nature after 16 months in country. The Corolla could hold 400 pounds of explosive, blast radius for casualties, 300 feet minimum. The distance to our team, 170 feet. To the Iraqi police checkpoint, 220 feet. If it detonates now, we're all dead. No bomb suit in existence can protect against that kind of overpressure at this range. Subject. Continuing east, turning corner, no longer has visual on our position. Pierce updates. I exhale slowly. 30 more seconds of life. Maybe. In EOD, we measure lifespan in heartbeats, not years. Continuing approach, I announce, forcing myself forward against every survival instinct screaming for retreat. Stand by for render safe procedure. EOD wasn't my original career path. I'd enlisted in the Army in 1998 as a combat engineer, expecting to build bridges and clear minefields, using established doctrine against conventional threats. By 2004, when I deployed to Iraq with the 101st Airborne, the threat environment had evolved into something entirely different. Improvised explosive devices had emerged as the insurgents' weapon of choice, cobbled together. Bombs made from artillery shells, leftover munitions, homemade explosives, and household items. They were killing and maiming U.S. troops at an alarming rate. The Army was desperate for EOD technicians willing to disarm these devices, and I volunteered for the specialized training. The Naval School Explosive Ordnance Disposal at Eglin Air Force Base was the most demanding academic experience of my life. For 9 grueling months, we studied conventional munitions, chemical and biological weapons, nuclear ordnance, and improvised devices. The washout rate hovered around 70%. Those who graduated returned to Iraq and Afghanistan as part of small, specialized teams tasked with the most dangerous job in the military, walking up to objects designed to kill you and rendering them safe. My team consisted of 3 EOD techs and 2 security personnel. Staff Sergeant Mitchell was our team leader, a 15-year veteran with over 300 successful render-safe missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Sergeant Carson was our intelligence specialist, responsible for identifying bomb-making signatures and tracking the evolving tactics of different insurgent cells. Pierce and Rodriguez handled security and communications, keeping watch while we worked and coordinating with nearby units. We operated primarily in eastern Baghdad, supporting both conventional Army units and Special Operations Forces. By May 2005, when this particular incident occurred, IEDs had grown increasingly sophisticated. The early days of simple command wire devices had given way to remotely triggered bombs using cell phones, garage door openers, infrared sensors, and pressure plates. The bomb makers were learning, adapting, and implementing countermeasures to our tactics. Each morning began with intelligence briefings on the latest IED trends, followed by equipment checks. Our primary response vehicle was a heavily modified M1114 Humvee with added armor, electronic countermeasures, and specialized tools. The Humvee carried our bomb suits, portable X-ray systems, disruptors, specialized weapons designed to disable IEDs with high-pressure water jets, demolition charges, robot platforms, and personal weapons. The call about the suspicious vehicle came at 0945. We were already returning from disarming a roadside IED consisting of 3 155mm artillery shells, daisy-chained together en route Pluto, a major supply route. Such double tasking was common. We frequently handled multiple calls per day, working 14 to 20-hour shifts during the most intense periods. EOD-3, this is Battle King 7, crackled the radio. We have a suspicious vehicle at grid coordinates Mike Bravo 543871. Vehicle abandoned with trunk partially open. Area has been cordoned. How copy? Solid copy. Battle King 7, Mitchell responded. EOD-3 en route. ETA 15 minutes. He turned to me in the passenger seat. Callahan, you're up. I handled the last one. I nodded, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Each EOD tech develops personal rituals before approaching a device. Some are religious, crossing themselves or reciting prayers. Others are superstitious, touching lucky charms or repeating mantras. Mine was methodical equipment checking, verifying each tool, each connection, each component of my bomb suit. Control the controllables, as Mitchell often said. We arrived at the scene to find a platoon from the 101st had established a security perimeter, keeping civilian vehicles and pedestrians at least 300 meters back. The platoon leader, a lieutenant fresh from West Point, briefed us on the situation. Vehicle was spotted approximately 1 hour ago. Engine still warm when we arrived. No civilian claimed ownership. Local shopkeepers say it doesn't belong to anyone from the neighborhood. Standard procedure called for our robot platform, a remotely operated tracked vehicle equipped with cameras, manipulator arms, and disruption tools to conduct the initial investigation. Unfortunately, our robot had been damaged during the previous call when an unexpectedly large blast had flipped it onto its back, severing several control cables. We'll have to do this manual, Mitchell decided after assessing the situation. Callahan, suit up. Carson, prep the portable X-ray. Pierce and Rodriguez establish overwatch positions with clear fields of fire. Donning the bomb suit is a deliberately slow process. The EOD-9 suit consists of multiple components: pants with suspenders, jacket, chest plate, groin protector, and helmet, each designed to overlap and provide maximum protection against fragmentation and overpressure. The helmet alone weighs 8 pounds and contains a sophisticated communication system and air circulation fan. Once sealed inside, your world changes dramatically. Peripheral vision disappears. Hearing becomes limited to what comes through the headset. Fine motor control is reduced by thick protective gloves. Movement becomes slow and deliberate, with each step requiring conscious effort against the suit's resistance and weight. "Comms check," I said once fully suited. "Lima Charlie," replied Mitchell, indicating loud and clear reception. "Remember the basics. Don't rush. Don't assume. Check for secondaries. We've got all day." But we didn't have all day. Baghdad in May is mercilessly hot, and heat exhaustion inside a bomb suit can incapacitate a technician in less than 30 minutes. Every second in the suit is a race against both the device and your own physiology. I began my approach using the duck walk, a modified stance that keeps your center of gravity low while distributing the suit's weight more evenly. Each step was placed deliberately, scanning the ground for disturbances that might indicate pressure plates or secondary devices. At 50 meters from the vehicle, I paused to catch my breath. My face shield was already fogging from exhalation, requiring me to activate the maximum setting on the helmet's circulation fan. The heads-up display showed my core temperature rising steadily, despite the cooling system. "Proceeding to 25-meter assessment point," I reported. At 25 meters, I conducted a detailed visual inspection using binoculars. The Corolla's trunk contained what appeared to be several artillery shells wired to a central hub. Classic VBIED configuration. The question wasn't whether it was a bomb, but how it was designed to detonate and whether it contained anti-handling devices to kill EOD technicians like me. That's when Pierce reported the man with the cell phone, initiating those tense moments of complete vulnerability in the kill zone. After the subject moved out of view, I continued my approach with heightened awareness. At 15 feet from the vehicle, I could see the device clearly. 4 155mm artillery shells arranged in a star pattern, connected by detonation cord to what appeared to be a central firing circuit. The trigger mechanism wasn't immediately visible, potentially concealed deeper in the EO trunk. "Preparing for X-ray assessment," I reported, setting up our portable X-ray system to peer deeper into the device's construction. The system consists of a small radioactive source on one side and an image plate on the other. When positioned properly, it provides a two-dimensional view of the device's internal components. I placed the source at the proper angle, retreated to the minimum safe distance, and activated the exposure. "Retrieving image," I called after the timed exposure completed. I carefully collected the image plate and brought it back to our vehicle where Carson processed it. "Shit," he said simply, after developing the image. "You've got a collapsing circuit with mercury switches, anti-handling device for sure, motion sensitive, and what looks like a remote receiver. Dual initiation system." This was among the most sophisticated configurations we'd encountered, designed specifically to kill EOD technicians. The collapsing circuit meant that cutting any wire would complete the circuit, rather than breaking it, instantly detonating the device. The mercury switches would trigger if the vehicle was moved, or jostled too aggressively. The remote receiver meant it could still be command detonated despite our jamming efforts. "Options?" Mitchell asked over the comms. "Controlled detonation," Carson suggested immediately. "Too many unknowns with this one. Controlled detonation. Destroying the device in place rather than attempting to disarm it was always the safest option from our perspective. But environmental considerations sometimes made it impossible. In this case, the vehicle was parked approximately 75 meters from a 3-story apartment building and 50 meters from the Iraqi police checkpoint. "Negative," Mitchell decided. "Too close to civilians. We need to render safe." That meant I would have to disarm a device specifically designed to kill anyone attempting to do exactly that. My mouth went dry as I considered the technical challenge ahead. "I need the water disruptor and the hook and line kit," I told Carson. "And the shape charge, just in case." The water disruptor is essentially a specialized shotgun that fires a concentrated jet of water at high velocity, designed to separate the firing circuit from the power source without providing enough energy to initiate the detonator. It's precise, enough to cut specific wires in a circuit when properly aimed. The hook and line kit allows for remote manipulation of components using grappling hooks attached to ropes, operated from a distance. If I could establish which wire connected the power source to the detonator, I could attempt to separate them using the water disruptor, then use the hook and line to safely extract the power source. I returned to the vehicle, this time carrying the additional equipment. Each step was a calculated risk. Too forceful, and the mercury switches might close. Too timid, and I'd succumb to heat exhaustion before completing the procedure. Subject with cell phone reappeared briefly at the corner, Pierce reported as I neared the car again. QRF is moving to intercept. That complicated matters. If the subject was indeed the trigger man and realized he was being pursued, he might attempt immediate detonation. I needed to work faster. At the vehicle, I carefully positioned the water disruptor, aiming at what the X-ray indicated was the junction between the power source and the firing circuit. This was the moment of maximum danger, the point where precision and knowledge meant the difference between life and death. Disruptor in position, I reported. Preparing to fire. Acknowledged, Mitchell replied. All personnel, minimum safe distance. Firing in 3, 2, 1. I activated the disruptor. The specialized round fired with a muffled thump, delivering a precise water jet into the device. Through my visor, I could see the water had punched a clean hole through the junction point, separating critical components. Now came the most dangerous part. I needed to verify the device was rendered safe before declaring the area clear. This required physical inspection to confirm the circuit had been properly disrupted. Using the hook and line kit, I carefully attached a grappling hook to what appeared to be the power source, a package of batteries wired to the firing system. With painstaking precision, I applied gentle pressure to the line, gradually increasing tension until the battery pack separated from the main device. Power source separated, I reported, allowing myself a small measure of relief. Proceeding with final inspection. The final inspection revealed the full sophistication of the device. In addition to the components we'd identified, the bomb maker had incorporated a secondary timer, a failsafe designed to detonate the device after a specific period, regardless of other triggers. Based on the timer setting, we had disarmed it with less than 7 minutes to spare. All clear, I finally announced after ensuring every component was separated and secured. Device rendered safe, ready for evidence collection. Only then did I allow the full weight of what had just occurred to register. I'd spent 42 minutes in the bomb suit in extreme heat, disarming a device specifically engineered to kill me. My body temperature had reached 102.8 degrees. My uniform beneath the suit was completely saturated with sweat. My hands trembled slightly from the combination of adrenaline, dehydration, and heat strain. Back at the vehicle, Carson helped extract me from the bomb suit while Mitchell radioed our success to headquarters. The process of removing the suit was almost as methodical as putting it on, each component carefully detached and inspected for damage. Water, I croaked, my throat parched from the ordeal. Rodriguez handed me a warm bottle, which I drained immediately. Pierce reported that the QRF had apprehended the subject with the cell phone 3 blocks away. He was being transported for interrogation. Device breakdown? Mitchell asked as I recovered in the shade of our vehicle. Professionally constructed, I replied. Professional analysis helping distract from my physical discomfort. Mercury switches weren't just for anti-handling. They were positioned to detect EOD tools being inserted into the trunk. Central firing circuit with redundant initiation systems, remote, timer, and anti-tampering. Signature matches the cell operating in Sadr City. Carson nodded, documenting each detail. That's the 3rd device with this configuration this month. They're specifically targeting EOD now. The realization settled over our team. We were no longer just clearing roadside bombs targeting convoys or foot patrols. We had become high-value targets ourselves. Our tactics and equipment studied by enemy bomb makers who designed devices specifically to kill us. Within an hour, we were called to another suspected IED on the other side of the city. No time to rest, no time to fully recover. The relentless pace of EOD operations allowed little opportunity for physical or psychological decompression. You good to go? Or need Mitchell to take this one? Carson asked as we drove to the new site. I'm good, I lied, already beginning my equipment check ritual. The truth was none of us were good in any meaningful sense of the word. We were functional, professional, and determined. But the cumulative strain of hundreds of approaches, to devices designed to kill us had taken a toll no one fully acknowledged. By the end of my tour, our 3-man EOD team had responded to over 400 calls and personally rendered safe 172 confirmed IEDs. 11 EOD technicians from other teams were killed during the same period. The statistical reality of our profession was brutally simple. The more devices you approached, the higher your chances of encountering one specifically designed to defeat your tactics and equipment. What separated the survivors from the dead wasn't just skill or training, though both were essential. It was a combination of meticulousness bordering on obsession, adaptability in the face of evolving threats, and, though no one liked to admit it, an element of pure luck. Years later, long after returning to the United States, I would still find myself scanning roadsides for disturbed earth, abandoned vehicles, or suspicious packages. The hypervigilance of EOD work permanently encoded in my neural pathways. Loud noises would trigger an instantaneous combat response. Crowds would feel threatening rather than merely uncomfortable. But in that moment, driving to our next call in Baghdad, there was only the next device, the next render-safe procedure, the next 30 seconds that might stretch into eternity. EOD technicians don't have the luxury of dwelling on close calls or celebrating successes. There's always another bomb, another puzzle with lethal consequences for failure. I checked my equipment one more time, controlling what I could control, preparing for what I couldn't. Another device waited for me in the unforgiving Baghdad heat. Another chess match against an unseen opponent who studied my every move, adapted to my techniques, and designed increasingly sophisticated ways to kill me. In EOD, we don't count the days until we go home. We count the devices until something goes wrong, and we never ever take for granted the 30 seconds between approach and render safe, the 30 seconds that separate life from eternity. Sergeant First Class Michael Ghost Reeves, 29 years old, sniper, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, born in Tucson, Arizona. The bullet travels at roughly 850 meters per second. From my position, it will take about 0.7 seconds to reach the target. In that time, the Earth rotates approximately 3 millimeters beneath the bullet's path. The wind, blowing gently from 9 o'clock, will push the round nearly 18 centimeters right. If I don't compensate, I exhale slowly, emptying my lungs completely as I dial in 2 clicks left on the scope. The target moves into perfect position, 400 meters down range. I place the crosshairs exactly 2 inches above his left shirt pocket and begin applying steady pressure to the trigger. Sniper check! Lieutenant Harrison's voice crackles through my earpiece. I freeze, finger still on the trigger, my target still perfectly framed. Seriously? I whisper into my mic, keeping my eye pressed to the scope. Now? Right fucking now. Protocol, Ghost, Harrison replies, his voice carrying that special mix of bureaucratic smugness and complete situational unawareness only lieutenants can truly master. Need verbal confirmation before engagement. I bite back the response I want to give. Something about where he can tactically insert his protocol. Target is military-aged male, carrying Russian-made PKM machine gun, moving into firing position oriented toward our convoy route. Requesting permission to engage. Stand by. The target settles into position behind a low wall, his machine gun now mounted on its bipod. In approximately 45 seconds, he'll have a clear line of fire on the convoy carrying the general. We're supposed to be protecting. But sure, let's have a quick discussion about rules of engagement. Permission granted, Harrison finally says. You are cleared hot. How generous of you, I mutter, then refocus. The target has shifted, slightly requiring a minor adjustment. I center the crosshairs once more, control my breathing, and squeeze the trigger. The rifle bucks against my shoulder as the round leaves the barrel. Through the scope, I watch the target drop instantly. No dramatic movie death, just a sudden marionette with cut strings. One moment alive and threatening, the next just meat cooling in the Mesopotamian sun. Target down, I report flatly. Resuming overwatch. Just another day at the office in this shithole called Iraq, where the pay is garbage, the hours are worse, and instead of a performance review, you get shot at by people who've elevated. Hiding in plain sight to an art form. Welcome to my world. Population. Dwindling. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been comfortably positioned at Camp Victory, enjoying the relative luxury of a semi-permanent base. By luxury, I mean the porta-johns were emptied regularly, and the chow hall occasionally served. Something that wasn't an MRE repackaged with a fancy name. The high life, by deployment standards. Staff Sergeant Miller found me at the makeshift shooting range I'd set up behind our barracks. Really just some sandbags and paper targets at measured distances. "Reeves," he called out as I squeezed. "Off the last round in a 5-shot group. Colonel wants to see you." I removed my hearing protection, giving him my best "what did I do now" expression. The last time a colonel wanted to see me specifically, I'd ended up spending 2 weeks in a hole in Fallujah with nothing but an MRE spoon to dig my latrine. Miller just shrugged. "Intel briefing in 20. Shower first, you smell like you've been spooning a camel." 23 minutes later, because nobody rushes a ranger sniper, I was sitting in a plywood-walled briefing room with air conditioning cold enough to give penguins frostbite. Colonel Richards, a career infantry officer with the build of someone who still PT'd like he was proving something, stood before a map of Baghdad and its surroundings. "Gentlemen," he began, looking at our assembled team of 6 operators, "we have a situation." In military speak, "we have a situation" could mean anything from someone forgot to order toilet paper to nuclear launch detected. Based on the number of stars on the video teleconference screen behind Richards, I was guessing closer to the latter. "General Stanley will be conducting a battlefield circulation to several FOBs next week," Richards continued. "His convoy has been designated high value, which means every insurgent cell between here and Mosul will be gunning for it." A major I didn't recognize stepped forward. "Intelligence indicates a significant uptick in chatter about a potential high-profile attack. We believe they know about the general's movement despite our operational security measures. So, don't send him," I suggested, earning several glares and one quickly suppressed smile from Miller. Colonel Richards fixed me with a stare that could wilt a cactus. "Thank you for your strategic insight, Sergeant Reeves. Perhaps next you'd like to explain counterinsurgency doctrine to General Petraeus." "Only if he's buying the beer, sir," I replied, before Miller kicked my boot under the table. The colonel ignored my comment and continued. "Your team will provide overwatch for key sections of the route, specifically these 3 choke points." He indicated areas on the map where our predictive analysis suggests the highest probability of attack. The briefing continued with the usual details: insertion methods, equipment loadouts, communication protocols, and extraction plans. All standard stuff drenched in PowerPoint slides created by staff officers who'd never spent a day outside the wire. As we filed out of the briefing room, Miller sidled up next to me. "You know, one day your mouth is going to write a check. Your ass can't cash." "My ass has excellent credit, Staff Sergeant," I replied. "AAA rated," he snorted. "Just get your kit ready. We're wheels up at 0400. The next morning found us aboard a UH-60 Blackhawk, heading toward our first position. A half-collapsed apartment building overlooking a stretch of highway the convoy would use. Lieutenant Harrison, our team leader, was on his first deployment, and had the eager, slightly constipated look of someone who'd memorized the field manual, but hadn't quite figured out that the enemy hadn't read it. "Remember, this is strictly observation and precision fire support," he shouted over the helicopter's rotor noise. "We maintain stealth, report enemy positions, and engage only when necessary." "So we're babysitting," I clarified, checking my rifle for the 3rd time. "We're providing critical force protection for a 3-star general," Harrison corrected with the earnestness of the recently commissioned. "Like I said," I muttered, "babysitting." We touched down 2 kilometers from our hide site, moving quickly into the cover of a dry creek bed. The mid-June heat was already approaching 90 degrees, and by the time we reached our position, my uniform was soaked through with sweat. The building, once a 4-story apartment complex, now missing most of its eastern wall thanks to an errant J-dam from the initial invasion, offered excellent fields of fire covering nearly 600 meters of the planned convoy route. Perfect sniper territory. While the rest of the team established security and communications, Miller and I began setting up our hide. This wasn't the Hollywood version with ghillie suits and dramatic music. It was methodical work, clearing debris, establishing shooting platforms, calculating range cards for likely engagement areas, and settling in for what would likely be days of mind-numbing boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. "Wind's going to be tricky here," Miller noted, studying the terrain through his spotting scope. "We've got a tunnel effect between those two buildings to the north." I grunted, in acknowledgement, already making mental notes. The key to effective sniping isn't just marksmanship. It's understanding your environment. How heat will distort your view as the day progresses. How shadows move with the sun. How concrete and asphalt release heat differently. 1,000 tiny details that determine whether your round hits or misses. "I count 6 potential firing positions within 500 meters of the route," I said, marking them on our sector sketch. "Another 3 within 700, but those would need a crew-served weapon to be effective." Miller nodded, adding his own observations. "Local population seems normal. No unusual absence of activity. Kids playing in that courtyard, women hanging laundry. If they're planning something, they're maintaining good OPSEC." By nightfall, we had our position fully established. The rest of the team rotated through security watches while Miller and I took turns on the sniper rifle. Standard procedure: one observes, one sleeps, switching every 4 hours. It's brutal on your system, but it ensures someone is always watching with fresh eyes. The first 48 hours passed without incident. We observed normal patterns of life, reported suspicious activities that invariably turned out to be nothing, and entertained ourselves with increasingly absurd interpretations of the graffiti on nearby walls. "That one definitely says, 'Yankees suck,'" Miller insisted, pointing to some elaborate Arabic script. "Pretty sure it's a recipe for hummus," I countered. "Or possibly a dissertation on why Lieutenant Harrison's face looks like someone tried to iron a scrotum." On the third day, things changed. The streets emptied too quickly after morning prayers. Shopkeepers closed early. Kids disappeared from play areas. "Something's coming," Miller murmured, scanning the area methodically. "They know." I keyed my radio. "Sierra Actual, this is Ghost. We're seeing a significant change in local patterns. Civilian presence dropping to near zero. Recommend delaying the convoy." Lieutenant Harrison's response was predictably by the book. "Negative, Ghost. The general's schedule is fixed. Continue observation and report any direct threats." Miller and I exchanged glances, the kind that said without words, "We're going to be earning our combat pay today." By mid-afternoon, the empty streets were practically screaming ambush. But without seeing actual weapons or fighters, we couldn't engage. So we waited, watching through our scopes as the minutes ticked by agonizingly slow. "Movement 3rd floor, building at your 2 o'clock, Miller said suddenly. "Window with the blue curtain." I shifted my rifle, finding the window in my scope. A curtain moved slightly, then a rifle barrel poked out briefly before disappearing again. "Sierra Actual, confirmed enemy fighter with long gun at grid 345722, I reported. "Request permission to engage." "Can you confirm hostile intent?" Harrison asked. I bit back a sarcastic response. "Unless he's hunting pigeons with an SVD Dragunov in an abandoned building overlooking our convoy route, I'd say hostile intent is pretty fucking clear." "Hold fire until you confirm he's engaging our forces," came the response. "By which point someone will already be dead," I muttered, but kept watching. 30 minutes later, radio traffic indicated the convoy was approaching our sector. The tension ratcheted up as Miller and I methodically scanned every window, doorway, and rooftop in our field of view. That's when I spotted him. The man with the PKM machine gun moving into position. The man I would watch drop through my scope after Lieutenant Harrison finally gave permission to fire. After that first shot, all hell broke loose. The carefully laid ambush, disrupted by the elimination of their heavy weapon, launched prematurely. Fighters appeared in windows and doorways, opening fire on the convoy now speeding through their kill zone. "Multiple targets, western buildings," Miller called out, directing my attention. Second floor, red door, roof corner, satellite dish, ground floor shop front with metal shutters. I engaged methodically, prioritizing the most immediate threats to the convoy. Each shot was a separate calculation, a new equation of distance, wind, and movement solved in seconds. 5 targets neutralized in under a minute, while our team's M240 opened up on fighters trying to deploy an IED in the convoy's path. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. The convoy pushed through, taking minimal damage from small arms fire. Our position, however, was now compromised. Bullets began impacting around our hide site as insurgents shifted their focus to the snipers who had disrupted their carefully planned attack. "Time to leave," Miller announced unnecessarily as concrete chips from a near miss stung my cheek. We fell back to our secondary position, covering each other's movement while the rest of the team provided suppressing fire. Standard break contact. Drill, executed under fire across 300 meters of urban terrain. Not exactly what you'd call a pleasant afternoon stroll. By the time we reached our extraction point, night was falling. The distinctive thump of helicopter rotors announced our ride home. Another Black Hawk, this one escorted by an Apache attack helicopter that was enthusiastically distributing 30mm Freedom to any buildings still showing signs of hostile activity. Back. At base, the debriefing was surprisingly brief. Colonel Richards actually seemed pleased, which was disconcerting given his normal demeanor of perpetual disappointment. "Good work out there," he said, which from him was practically a ticker tape parade. "General Stanley's vehicle took some hits but no casualties. Your early engagement of their heavy weapons likely prevented a much worse outcome." Lieutenant Harrison, to his credit, didn't mention our disagreement over rules of engagement. Instead, he focused on the team's performance and the intelligence gathered about the ambush tactics. As we filed out, Richards called me back. "Reeves, a moment." I braced for whatever administrative punishment was coming for my radio chatter. Instead, he handed me a folded piece of paper. "The general asked me to give you this. Said the round that took out the machine gunner probably saved his vehicle." I unfolded the note after leaving his office. It was brief and to the point. "Good shooting. Next time, take the shot when you need to. Some protocols matter more than others. Stanley." I showed it to Miller back at our hooch. He read it and laughed. "Congratulations. You've now received written authorization to ignore lieutenants." "I was doing that anyway," I replied, cleaning my rifle with methodical precision. "But it's nice to have the paperwork in order." That night, I lay on my cot thinking about the day's events, about the men I'd killed through the clinical distance of a scope, about how strange it was to end multiple human lives and then eat pizza in the chow hall 3 hours later, about the bizarre reality where 1 minute you're solving complex physics problems to deliver death at 900 meters, and the next you're arguing with supply about why you need more rifle cleaning solvent. People ask what it's like being a sniper. They expect some profound philosophical answer or maybe a patriotic speech about protecting freedom. The truth is much simpler and more complicated all at once. It's a job. A job where success is measured in enemy bodies and your office views change daily. Where your performance review comes in the form of after-action reports and whether your friends come home breathing. Where gallows humor is the only kind that makes sense because the alternative is to really think about what you're doing, about the physics and geometry of killing you've mastered. So we joke. We mock the lieutenants and their precious protocols. We compete for the longest confirmed kill. We give our rifles names like they're pets instead of tools of destruction. We do whatever it takes to keep performing the impossible calculation. How to remain human while methodically ending the humanity of others. Tomorrow we'll do it all again. Another hide site, another Overwatch mission, another opportunity to balance breath and heartbeat and wind and gravity into that perfect moment when the world narrows to nothing but crosshairs centered on a stranger's chest. Another chance to be the unseen variable in someone else's equation. Sergeant Thomas Blackwood, 32 years old. Medical Support Team, 42nd Commando, Royal Marines, 3rd Commando Brigade, born in Newcastle, England. The helicopter's rotors slice through reality itself, its noise pulling me deeper into the red-tinged dream that has become my existence. Hydraulic fluid mingles with blood on my boots. Impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. The CH-47 Chinook shudders violently as another thermal pocket disrupts its flight path, but I barely register the motion. My hands continue working automatically, applying pressure, inserting IVs, checking pulses, while my mind floats somewhere outside my body, watching the scene unfold with detached fascination. Blood pressure dropping, 60/40, shouts Corporal Jenkins above the deafening roar. His voice seems to arrive in fragments, broken by the thundering rotors and the strange acoustics of this liminal space between life and death. The casualty beneath my hands, Lance Corporal Michaels, stares up at the helicopter's ceiling with dilated pupils. 18 years old. Both legs gone above the knee from an EFP strike on his Warrior vehicle. His lips move, forming words I can't hear but somehow understand. Mum. I want my mum. Time stutters and skips like a damaged record. One moment I'm checking his femoral tourniquets. The next I'm pushing another syringe of morphine. Then suddenly I'm compressing his chest as his heart gives out. The helicopter interior transforms around me, expanding and contracting like a living organism. The other casualties laid along the blood-slick floor become strange hieroglyphics, spelling out a message I can almost decipher. We're losing him. Jenkins' voice cuts through the surreal fog. Reality snaps back into focus, momentarily. My hands work with practiced precision, chest compressions, airway check, defibrillator prep. The young Marine's blood covers my arms to the elbows, warm and accusatory. No pulse. Beginning CPR, I hear myself shout, though my voice sounds foreign to my ears. As I press rhythmically on his chest, the helicopter cabin fills with a golden light that no one else seems to notice. Dust particles dance in the luminous beams, arranging themselves into the faces of every patient I've lost in the past 6 months. This isn't normal. I know this isn't normal, but after 347 casualty evacuations in 6 months, nothing feels normal anymore. The line between waking life and fevered hallucination has worn perilously thin. As I fight to save the life, beneath my hands I can't help but wonder which side of that line I'm currently on. My first casualty evacuation mission in Iraq had been relatively straightforward. 2 months into the deployment, a 4-vehicle patrol from Alpha Company had hit an IED outside Basra. 1 fatality, declared dead at scene. 3 wounded. 1 critical with traumatic amputation of the left arm. 2 with survivable fragmentation injuries. Standard medical protocol had kicked in. Tourniquets applied by the patrol's combat medic. 9-line medevac request transmitted. Our medical team scrambled from our forward operating base. The procedures I'd drilled countless times at the Royal Marines Commando Training Center in Lympstone had seemed to unfold in perfect sequence. Textbook triage, textbook treatment, textbook evacuation back to the surgical team at our battalion aid station. I'd even managed to stabilize the amputee case, Lance Corporal Edwards, well enough that he survived his injuries and eventually returned to the UK for rehabilitation. Solid work, Blackwood, our chief medical officer had commented afterward. Keep that up, and we'll get through this deployment with minimal losses. Such naive optimism, such blind faith in protocols and procedures. The carefully structured reality of military medicine soon began to crack under the relentless pressure of Iraq's chaos. By the end of the first month, we'd conducted 26 casualty evacuations. By the third month, 79. The injuries grew more severe as insurgents developed increasingly sophisticated IEDs, particularly explosively formed penetrators, EFPs, designed specifically to punch through armored vehicles. These created wounds unlike anything in our training manuals, hideous hybrid injuries that combined blast trauma, burns, massive tissue loss, and embedded fragments of both the weapon and the vehicle. Sleep became a luxury, measured in erratic 90-minute increments. The constant adrenaline surges followed by crushing exhaustion began to alter my perception of reality. Colors became unnaturally vibrant. Sounds acquired strange harmonics. Time itself became elastic, stretching during intensive treatment, then suddenly compressing so that hours passed in what felt like minutes. The first hallucination occurred during our 104th casualty evacuation. We were treating a local Iraqi child caught in crossfire, a 6-year-old boy with a gunshot wound to the abdomen. As I worked to control the bleeding, I distinctly saw a luminous outline surrounding his body, pulsing in rhythm with his failing heartbeat. I blinked hard, assuming exhaustion was playing tricks on my vision, but the phenomenon persisted. "You see that?" I asked Jenkins, who was assisting me. "See what?" "The light around the boy." Jenkins had given me a concerned look. "No light, mate, but you should get some rest after this one. You're going on 36 hours without sleep." I'd nodded, attributing the vision to fatigue. But when the boy died minutes later despite our efforts, the luminous outline had detached from his body, hovering in the helicopter cabin for several seconds before dissipating through the ceiling. No one else reacted to this impossible sight, didn't mention the incident to anyone. Combat medics who start seeing things tend to be pulled from duty, and my unit couldn't afford to lose an experienced medical sergeant. Instead, I pushed through, convincing myself it was simply an artifact of sleep deprivation. But the visions continued and evolved. During mass casualty events, I began to perceive injuries in strange, symbolic forms. Blast wounds appeared as blooming red flowers. Bullet holes emitted musical tones only I could hear. Dying patients sometimes spoke to me in voices that couldn't possibly carry above the helicopter noise, sharing profound insights or messages for loved ones that I dutifully recorded but never delivered, uncertain of their origin. Perhaps most disturbing was the gradual transformation of the casualty evacuation helicopters themselves. What began as utilitarian airframes of metal and canvas gradually metamorphosed in my perception into living entities, great beasts that consumed the wounded and sometimes digested them into health, other times excreted them as corpses. The rotors became wings, the engines beating hearts, the cabin an esophagus through which broken bodies passed. "This bird feels hungry today," I remarked casually during a mission in our 4th month. Captain Wallace, our flight surgeon, had stared at me. "What did you say?" I'd recovered quickly. "The bird, the Chinook, seems to be running rough. Vibrations worse than usual." He'd accepted this explanation, but I caught him watching me with clinical interest afterward. I became more careful about vocalizing my increasingly bizarre perceptions. The official name for our medical evacuation missions was CASEVAC, casualty evacuation. But among ourselves, we'd taken to calling them blood runs. Each mission followed the same basic template: scramble alert, rapid helicopter launch, insertion into a hot zone, treatment under fire, evacuation to higher medical echelon. But within this template, infinite macabre variations unfolded. There was the Dawn mission where we landed in an impact crater still smoking from an artillery strike. The ground so hot, it melted the rubber soles of our boots as we loaded 7 broken soldiers onto stretchers. The night extraction where fire created constellations of deadly light around our helicopter, forcing us to treat patients in total darkness as the pilots executed violent evasive maneuvers. The surreal afternoon when we evacuated 3 British soldiers and 2 insurgents who had been trying to kill each other minutes earlier, now lying side by side as we fought equally hard to save both sides. By the 150th casualty evacuation, I existed in 2 realities simultaneously: the objective world of medical procedures and tactical situations, and a parallel hallucinatory realm where wounds spoke, helicopters breathed, and the boundaries between life and death became permeable membranes rather than absolute thresholds. Major Thompson, our company commander, finally noticed something was amiss during a particularly chaotic mission near Amara. 6 casualties, from an ambush, 4 of them critical. As I triaged the wounded, I apparently began categorizing them not by standard medical priority, but by the color and intensity of the auras I perceived surrounding them. "The blue one first," I'd ordered, pointing to a soldier with massive chest trauma. "He's fading fast. The bright red can wait. That pattern means the bleeding is mostly superficial." Thompson had pulled me aside after the mission. Blackwood, what the bloody hell was that about? Blue ones, red patterns? You're not making sense. I'd blinked, suddenly aware that my private perceptual system had leaked into my external communications. Sorry, sir. Shorthand I've developed. Blue for respiratory distress, red for hemorrhagic. Helps me process multiple casualties quickly. He'd seemed skeptical, but let it go. Get 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. That's an order. You're no good to anyone if you crack up. I'd tried to comply, but 6 hours into my mandated rest period, another casualty call came in. Heavy contact in Basra city center. Multiple casualties, including civilians. All medical personnel required. I was back in the helicopter 30 minutes later, the brief respite serving only to make the return to chaos more disorienting. That mission, our 206th, marked a turning point in my psychological descent. As we approached the landing zone, I saw the city of Basra not as streets and buildings, but as a vast wounded organism. Smoke columns became labored breathing. Explosions appeared as hemorrhages in the urban tissue. The radio chatter transformed into the delirious mutterings of a feverish patient. We landed in a marketplace square that had been hit by a car bomb. The scene that greeted us existed simultaneously as a standard mass casualty site and as a surrealist canvas painted in viscera and twisted metal. Body parts arranged themselves into meaningful patterns only I could interpret. Blood pooled into shapes that foretold which patients would survive and which were already moving toward death despite our intervention. Blackwood, focus, Jenkins had shouted, snapping me momentarily back to conventional reality. Adult male, partial traumatic amputation of the right leg, hemorrhaging severely. I'd nodded, kneeling beside the injured Iraqi civilian. As I applied the tourniquet, I noticed his eyes were the exact same shade of brown as my brother's. This mundane observation somehow bridged my divided perception, allowing me to function effectively despite the hallucinatory overlay that now permanently colored my experience. In the helicopter, ascending with 7 casualties, I worked methodically while surrounded by spectral presences only I could see. Former patients hovered near similar injuries, pointing out details I might have missed. The helicopter itself seemed to offer advice in the form of rhythmic vibrations that guided my hands to the correct treatments. I accepted these manifestations without question, incorporating their impossible insights into my medical practice. Remarkably, my performance metrics remained exceptional. Despite, or perhaps because of, my altered perception, I maintained the highest patient survival rate in the unit. Captain Wallace, the flight surgeon who had earlier regarded me with suspicion, now requested me specifically for the most difficult evacuations. Whatever your method is, it's working, he told me after a particularly successful mission involving 3 triple amputees, all of whom survived against overwhelming odds. I don't need to know how you're doing it, just keep doing it. What he couldn't understand was that I was no longer practicing medicine in any conventional sense. I had become a shaman, a translator between worlds, guided by visions and intuitions that transcended rational understanding. Blood spoke to me. Wounds revealed their histories and futures. The thin membrane between life and death had become transparent, allowing me to guide patients back from thresholds they hadn't yet visibly approached. Your heart will stop in approximately 40 seconds, I informed a seemingly stable casualty during our 273rd evacuation. I'm administering atropine now as a preventative measure. Jenkins had looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but exactly 38 seconds later, the monitor showed ventricular fibrillation. The atropine, already in the patient's system, helped us restore normal rhythm almost immediately. How did you know? Jenkins asked afterward, his voice hushed with something between awe and fear. I couldn't explain that I'd seen death's approach, as a darkening penumbra at the edges of the patient's aura, or that the specific pattern of that darkness had indicated cardiac rather than respiratory failure. Instead, I'd shrugged. Experience. You start to recognize the patterns. By our 300th casualty evacuation, I'd stopped attempting to distinguish between my hallucinatory perceptions and objective reality. The distinction seemed increasingly irrelevant. Whatever realm I was operating in, it was yielding results that could not be argued with. Patients who should have died lived. Injuries revealed aspects invisible to medical imaging. Treatment succeeded when applied according to intuitions that defied standard protocols. Which brings me back to Lance, Corporal Michaels, lying beneath my hands in the shuddering Chinook as we race toward the surgical team at Basra Air Station. His clinical presentation is unambiguous: catastrophic blood loss, hypovolemic shock, cardiac arrest. By every medical standard, he is beyond saving. Yet the golden light filling the cabin tells me otherwise. The dust motes arranging themselves into familiar faces are showing me exactly where to place my hands, exactly when to administer specific medications, exactly how to time chest compressions to synchronize with the helicopter's vibrations. Still no pulse, Jenkins reports, his voice heavy with the resignation of experienced medical personnel who recognize when death has claimed its prize. We're not losing him, I reply with absolute certainty that must sound like denial to my colleagues. Prepare 300 milligrams of amiodarone and get the defibrillator ready again. Jenkins hesitates, then complies. Standard protocols would have us cease resuscitation efforts given the elapsed time and lack of response, but my peculiar reputation has earned me latitude outside normal parameters. As I continue compressions, I see Michael's life essence, AI, luminous silver-blue energy that transcends simplistic concepts like soul or consciousness, still tethered to his physical form by the thinnest of filaments. It hasn't departed. It's merely suspended between states. The golden light in the cabin intensifies, concentrating around my hands on his chest. Charging, Jenkins announces, preparing the defibrillator. Clear, I order, lifting my hands momentarily. The electric shock causes Michael's body to convulse. In my divided perception, it also sends a pulse of energy along that silver-blue filament, drawing his essence back toward its physical anchor. Still no pulse, Jenkins reports. Again, I insist. And push the amiodarone now. We repeat the process, once, twice. On the third attempt, something miraculous happens, at least in the conventional medical understanding. Michael's heart begins beating, weak and irregular at first, then stronger, establishing a sustainable rhythm. Holy shit, breathes Jenkins. We've got him back. In my perception, the event is rendered in mythic imagery, the silver-blue essence flowing back into the physical vessel, the golden light suffusing Michael's body with vitality, the dust mote faces smiling in approval, before dissolving back into ordinary helicopter debris. He'll make it, I say with the absolute certainty that has become both my gift and my burden. The remainder of the flight passes in the usual time-distorted fashion. Michael's condition stabilizes improbably. The other casualties receive their necessary treatments. The helicopter, that great living beast of metal and canvas, delivers us safely to the medical facility where surgeons wait to continue what we've begun. As we transfer the patients to the trauma teams, a surgeon pulls me aside. The leg amputation case, remarkable save. His vitals were incompatible with life according to the flight medic's notes. How did you manage it? I struggled to translate my experience into terms he would understand. How do I explain that death has become a permeable boundary in my perception? That injuries speak to me in sensory languages beyond the conventional five? That reality itself has become fluid and negotiable in my hands? Persistence, I finally reply. Sometimes you just have to refuse the obvious conclusion. He nods, accepting this non-explanation, then hurries away to begin surgery. I stand in the receiving bay, blood drying on my uniform, watching the organized chaos of the trauma center with its own peculiar choreography. In my divided vision, the medical facility is simultaneously a standard military hospital and an organic entity processing damaged components through various specialized chambers. Jenkins appears beside me, offering a bottle of water. That's 348, he says, referring to our casualty evacuation count. Sleep before the next one. You're starting to look as bad as the patients. I nod, knowing sleep will bring no relief from my dual perception. The hallucinations, if that's what they are, no longer require exhaustion or stress to manifest. They have become my default state of consciousness, a permanent lens through which I experience reality. As I make my way to the sleeping quarters, I pass the hospital's small chapel. On impulse, I enter the empty room and sit in the rear pew. No religious conviction draws me here, just a desperate need for any space that isn't filled with blood and broken bodies. In the chapel's quiet dimness, I finally confront the question I've been avoiding. Am I losing my mind or gaining access to a deeper layer of reality? Does my fractured perception represent psychological breakdown or the expansion of consciousness beyond conventional limitations? I have no answer. Perhaps both are true simultaneously, just as Lance Corporal Michaels was simultaneously dead and alive beneath my hands. Perhaps the extremity of my experience has simply revealed the arbitrary nature of the boundaries we impose on reality. What I know with certainty is that tomorrow will bring mission 349. Another helicopter ride into chaos, more broken bodies under my care, more blood on my hands, both literally and in the deeper moral sense that comes with holding lives in the balance. The golden light that now follows me everywhere intensifies briefly in the chapel's stillness. The dust motes here arrange themselves into a message I can almost decipher. Something about purpose, about necessary descent into darkness, about finding healing through wounding. I close my eyes, but the visions continue on the inside of my eyelids. There is no escape from what I've become. There is only the next mission, the next casualty, the next impossible save that will further blur the line between medical skill and mystical intervention. In Iraq's bleeding heart, I have become something, neither fully medical professional nor purely supernatural agent, but a crimson angel moving between worlds, perceiving both the physical trauma and the metaphysical patterns underlying it. Whether this transformation represents ascension or descent remains unclear. All I know is that when the next call comes, I will board the living helicopter with its beating mechanical heart, and I will once again place my hands, guided by visions only I can see, on those hovering between life and death. And some, defying all medical expectation, will return with me from that threshold. This is not the medicine I was trained to practice, but in this war that makes no sense, perhaps only nonsensical methods can truly heal. Specialist James Donovan, 25 years old, combat medic, 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry Regiment, Rakkasans, 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault, born in Worcester, Massachusetts. The sound of an incoming round has a distinctive whistle. Growing up in Massachusetts, I'd never heard that sound. Now I could identify it instantly, like recognizing an old friend's voice. Or in this case, an enemy who visited too often. The whistle grew louder, followed by the jarring impact and concussive blast of a mortar shell impacting 30 meters. From our aid station, the plywood walls shuddered. Medical supplies tumbled from shelves. Another day at Forward Operating Base Spiker. Incoming, someone shouted unnecessarily as 2 more explosions rocked the compound in rapid succession. I was already moving, grabbing my aid bag and helmet. The radio crackled with the inevitable news. Mascal, Mascal, Mascal. Multiple casualties at ECP-2. Medical team respond. Captain Rivera, our physician assistant, was shouting orders as we scrambled. Donovan, Lewis, grab the trauma packs and meet me at the vehicle. Johnson, prep the aid station for incoming. Let's move. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 hours earlier, I'd been treating an elderly Iraqi man for hypertension and providing vitamins to malnourished children at a Goodwill medical clinic in a nearby village. Now I was rushing toward American soldiers wounded by insurgents who might have been watching me from that same village. This was Iraq, in the summer of 2005, a schizophrenic battlefield where we'd build a school in the morning and clear IEDs in the afternoon. Where every act of compassion might be answered with an ambush, and every show of force could undermine months of careful relationship building. A place where the lines between friend and enemy blurred like mirages on the desert horizon. And I existed at the bloodied intersection of it all, a combat medic trained to save lives in a place dedicated to ending them. My deployment had begun 4 months earlier with the characteristic hurry-up-and-wait rhythm of military operations. We'd spent weeks preparing equipment, conducting medical readiness training, and sitting through countless briefings on everything from the proper way to wear our body armor to the cultural sensitivities of treating Iraqi women. Our battalion was part of the storied Rakkasans, the 317 Infantry with a combat lineage stretching back to World War II. As the battalion's medical platoon, we weren't the door kickers or the trigger pullers, but we went where they went. Sometimes following close behind, sometimes right alongside them. Remember, you're medics first, but you're still soldiers. First Sergeant Kaplan had reminded us during our final pre-deployment brief. The enemy doesn't care about the red cross on your arm. In fact, in some cases it makes you a target. Keep your head on a swivel, maintain your situational awareness, and for God's sake, shoot back if you're taking fire. He wasn't wrong. The Geneva Conventions meant little to an enemy who filmed beheadings for propaganda videos. While conventional warfare had rules, medics were non-combatants, medical vehicles were protected, guerrilla warfare operated by different principles. There, a medic was just another American in a uniform, perhaps even a higher value target due to the psychological impact of killing healers. My first real test came 3 weeks into the deployment. Our platoon was supporting a cordon and search operation in a small town south of Tikrit. The mission had gone smoothly until the extraction phase, when the lead vehicle in our convoy struck an IED. The explosion flipped the armored Humvee onto its side, leaving 4 soldiers trapped inside as small arms fire erupted from nearby buildings. I was in the 4th vehicle back, but I remember with perfect clarity the moment I heard Staff Sergeant Clark's voice on the radio. IED strike, multiple casualties, requesting immediate medical support. My training took over. I grabbed my aid bag, checked my sidearm, and moved to exit the vehicle even as rounds pinged off the armor around us. Hold position, my vehicle commander ordered. We're still taking effective fire. There are casualties up there, I argued, adrenaline overriding protocol. And there'll be more if you get yourself shot, he snapped back. Wait for suppressing fire. The next 90 seconds stretched into what felt like hours as our gunners returned fire and the infantry established security. When we finally got the all clear to move forward, I sprinted to the overturned Humvee, keeping low and using vehicles for cover. The scene inside was chaos. The driver was unconscious with a severe head injury. The vehicle commander had a compound fracture of his femur with arterial bleeding. The other 2 soldiers were dazed but ambulatory, helping to extract their wounded comrades. I focused on the immediate life threats, applying a tourniquet to the commander's leg and stabilizing the driver's cervical spine, all while the sporadic crack of gunfire continued around us. "How we looking, Doc?" Sergeant Miller asked as he provided security, his rifle trained on a window where muzzle flashes had been spotted. Drivers, critical, possible traumatic. "Brain injury. Commander's stable for now, but needs immediate evac. Can we get a bird in here?" Miller nodded, relaying the request over his radio. Meanwhile, I continued treatment, establishing an IV line in the commander despite the awkward angle in the overturned vehicle, checking the driver's pupils, which showed the telltale signs of increasing intracranial pressure. 20 minutes later, a Black Hawk landed in a nearby clearing. We loaded the casualties and I accompanied them, continuing treatment as we lifted off. The door gunners scanned constantly for threats, a reminder that even medical evacuation helicopters weren't immune to enemy fire. The driver, Specialist Rodriguez, would survive but with permanent disabilities. The commander, Lieutenant Parker, lost his leg but returned to duty months later, a qualified success by combat medicine standards. But that day taught me the fundamental contradiction of my role in this war. In conventional conflict, medics operate in a secured area behind the lines. In counterinsurgency, there are no lines. The battlefield is everywhere and nowhere. We were simultaneously medical personnel protected by international law and targets with red crosses on our sleeves. Over the following months, this contradiction only deepened. We established regular medical clinics in local villages, providing primary care to civilians who had limited access to health care. These humanitarian missions were part of the broader counterinsurgency strategy. Winning hearts and minds by addressing basic needs, the clinics were rewarding work, treating children with easily preventable diseases, helping elderly patients manage chronic conditions, even delivering babies on 2 memorable occasions. For those brief hours, it felt like we were making a difference beyond the immediate military objectives, yet we knew, all of us knew, that among the grateful faces were those who provided information to insurgents, who perhaps planted the IEDs we encountered on the roads back to base. The same village where I vaccinated children in the morning might be the source of the mortar fire that wounded soldiers in the evening. Captain Rivera addressed this directly, after we lost 2 soldiers to an IED on a route we'd traveled safely dozens of times before. "This is the nature of this fight," he said during our evening medical brief. "We'll continue the humanitarian missions because they matter, both strategically and morally. But never forget where we are and what we're doing. Your compassion can't override your caution." It was this duality that defined our deployment and my understanding of modern warfare, the constant shifting between conventional military operations and counterinsurgency, between providing health care and surviving attacks, between being protected medical personnel and priority targets. The mortar attack on a fob spiker that day resulted in 7 casualties, 3 with shrapnel wounds requiring immediate surgery, 4 with less severe injuries. Our medical team moved with practiced efficiency, triaging at the point of injury, stabilizing during transport, and transferring to the surgical team at our aid station. I was assisting with an abdominal wound when Captain Rivera called me over. "Donovan, we've got incoming. QRF engaged multiple insurgents near the eastern village. They're taking casualties and need an immediate response. You're going with Alpha Company." 15 minutes later, I was in a Humvee racing toward the sound of gunfire. Staff Sergeant Ramirez outlined the situation as we moved. 2 vehicles from Quick Reaction Force took fire from a compound on the village outskirts. They've got 3 wounded and are pinned down. We're going in to extract them and eliminate the threat. The battlefield came into view as we crested a small rise. 2 damaged Humvees taking cover behind an earthen berm. Several soldiers providing suppressing fire toward a compound about 200 meters away. Muzzle flashes from the buildings indicated at least 3 firing positions. Our convoy spread out, establishing a support by fire position as the infantry prepared to assault the compound. My job was clear: reach the casualties, assess, treat, and prepare for evacuation. "Ready to move on my signal," Lieutenant Wilson said, watching as our heavy weapons poured fire into the enemy positions. "Donovan, you follow the second team. Do not move to the casualties until we've secured the immediate area." "Understood." I nodded, checking my aid bag one last time. The weight of the combat lifesaver equipment, tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, airways, IV fluids, was familiar and reassuring. "Execute, execute, execute," Wilson commanded, and the assault element moved forward in practiced bounds, one group moving while another provided covering fire. I followed as instructed, staying low, moving quickly between cover points. The distinctive crack of AK-47s mixed with the sharper report of our M4s. An RPG screamed overhead, impacting behind us with a thunderous explosion. The acrid smell of gunpowder and dust filled the air. We reached the pinned-down vehicles, and I immediately identified the casualties: a driver with multiple gunshot wounds to the chest despite his body armor, a gunner with shrapnel injuries to his face and neck, and a 3rd soldier with a through-and-through wound to his shoulder. "The driver's critical," the team's combat lifesaver informed me, maintaining pressure on the chest wounds. "I've applied chest seals, but he's deteriorating." I went to work focusing first on the most seriously injured. The driver's pulse was weak and rapid. Breath sounds revealed a tension pneumothorax, air trapped in his chest cavity, collapsing his lung and compressing his heart. I needed to perform a needle decompression immediately. "Cover us," I shouted as I pulled out a 14-gauge needle. Around us, the firefight continued unabated, our forces now clearing the compound room by room while support elements provided suppressing fire. I inserted the needle into the driver's chest, between the ribs at the correct intercostal space. A rush of air confirmed the diagnosis. His color immediately improved, though he remained critically wounded. "We need immediate casevac," I called over the radio. "1 urgent surgical, 2 priority. Medevac bird is 10 minutes out," came the response. "LZ will be the field west of your position." Those 10 minutes stretched interminably as I moved between casualties, establishing IV access, administering pain management, updating vital signs, all while the sounds of combat surrounded us. A secondary explosion rocked the compound as our troops found and triggered a cache of weapons and explosives. When the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors finally approached, we were ready. The 3 casualties were packaged for transport, vital information recorded on cards attached to their uniforms. I would accompany them, continuing treatment during the flight to the combat support hospital at Baghdad. As we lifted off, I caught a final glimpse of the battlefield below, smoke rising from the compound, soldiers securing the perimeter, medical personnel treating Iraqi civilians caught in the crossfire. The complete picture of modern warfare in a single frame. The flight to Baghdad took 15 minutes. I spent every second monitoring vital signs, adjusting treatment, and speaking reassurance to conscious patients. The driver, Specialist Chen, remained critical but stable. The others were in serious but stable condition. At the CSH, the military equivalent of a trauma center, we were met by a trauma team who took over care. The choreographed handoff was another example of conventional military medicine working within the unconventional battlefield. The CSH provided world-class care just miles from active combat zones, achieving survival rates that would have been impossible in previous conflicts. Hours later, after ensuring my patients were stable, I caught a ride back to Fob Spiker. Exhausted but unable to sleep, I sat in the aid station writing detailed notes about the casualties I'd treated that day, both American and Iraqi, both from the mortar attack and the subsequent engagement. Captain Rivera found me there around midnight. "You did good work today, Donovan," he said, pouring 2 cups of coffee and sliding one toward me. "All 3 from the QRF are stable. Chen's being evacuated to Germany, but they expect him to pull through." I nodded, too tired for words. The adrenaline crash left me hollow and contemplative. "It gets to you, doesn't it?" Rivera continued. "The back and forth. 1 minute you're treating dehydration at a village clinic, the next you're extracting casualties under fire from that same village. How do we reconcile it?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me for months. Finally finding voice. "How do we build trust when we don't know who to trust? How do we heal in the morning and hunt in the afternoon?" Rivera considered this for a long moment. "We don't," he finally said. "That's the nature of this fight. It's not like our grandfather's war with clear lines and uniformed enemies. It's messy and contradictory and morally complex." He paused, sipping his coffee before continuing. "But our job, your job, remains constant. You treat whoever needs treatment. You save lives when you can. You maintain your humanity in an inhuman situation. Even when they're trying to kill us?" I asked. "Especially then," he replied. "That's what separates us from them. We follow rules even when they don't. We treat their wounded even after they target our medics." His words didn't solve the contradiction, but they helped me frame it. The duality wasn't a flaw in our approach. It was the fundamental nature of the conflict itself. A war fought simultaneously by conventional military means and counterinsurgency principles. A battlefield where medical personnel were both protected by tradition and targeted by necessity. 2 days later, we were back at the same village, running another medical clinic. Some faces were missing, families who had fled after the fighting. But most remained, including several who had been injured in the crossfire and now sought our care. As I treated an elderly man's shrapnel wound, likely caused by our own weapons during the compound clearance, I couldn't help but wonder if he knew who had been firing at us. If his son or grandson had been among the insurgents, if the hands I was bandaging had recently passed information leading to the attack. Yet in that moment, it didn't matter. He was a patient. I was a medic. The red cross on my arm meant something, even if it was sometimes a target. In the contradictions and complexities of this war, that clarity of purpose was something to hold on to, a constant in the shifting sands of a battlefield without borders or clear enemies. I finished the bandage, explained the care instructions through our interpreter, and moved to the next patient. The line stretched out the door of the makeshift clinic. Behind me, the sound of our security element maintaining watchful vigilance. Above, the distinctive thump of Apache helicopters providing overwatch. This was our war. Conventional, capabilities applied to an unconventional fight. Medical care delivered with one hand while the other remained near a weapon. Healing and harming intertwined in ways military doctrine never fully prepared us for. And we, the combat medics of the 101st, existed at the bloody crossroads between them all, bearing the red cross that marked us as both healers and targets in a war with rules that changed daily. Sergeant Marcus Reeves, 26 years old, Charlie Company, 115 Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, born in Columbus, Georgia. Contact left, technical with mounted PKM. The words explode from my throat as the battered white Toyota pickup swerves from a side street, its bed-mounted machine gun already spitting fire toward our convoy. I swing the 25mm chain gun on our Bradley fighting vehicle toward the threat, my finger hovering over the trigger as the targeting reticle settles on the gunner. One squeeze and the threat disappears in a spray of high explosive rounds, but I hesitate. The Toyota is 30 meters from a crowded market. Women and children clearly visible behind the technical. The rules of engagement flash through my mind. Like warning lights. Positive identification required. Minimize collateral damage. Use proportional force. Protect civilian lives. Those same rules are why we're driving predictable routes through Ramadi at predictable times. Why the insurgents knew exactly where to place the IED that killed Rodriguez last week. Why we're now taking fire from a position they've deliberately chosen to maximize civilian presence. Engage that technical now! Lieutenant Parker screams through the intercom from the commander's position. The driver swerves our Bradley, nearly throwing me from the gunner's seat as a rocket-propelled grenade streaks past our front slope. I make my decision. The 25mm gun roars to life, sending 3 precisely aimed rounds into the Toyota's engine block rather than the gunner. The vehicle lurches to a halt, smoke pouring from its disabled front end. The insurgent gunner continues firing, rounds pinging harmlessly off our frontal armor. "Why the hell didn't you target the gunner?" Parker demands. "Too many civilians behind him, sir," I respond mechanically, already transitioning to the coaxial machine gun, its 7.62mm rounds less likely to overpenetrate and hit the marketplace. Beyond, as I engage with the less powerful weapon, time seems to slow. Every decision in this moment balances on the knife edge between what the rules demand and what survival requires. Follow the ROE perfectly and risk the lives of my crew. Abandon them entirely and save the vehicle at the cost of civilian casualties. And my own humanity. This is the line we walk every day in Iraq, the impossible tightrope between fighting by the rules and coming home alive. Our deployment to Iraq began in February 2005. By then, the initial invasion phase had long since ended, and the counterinsurgency fight was in full swing. Charlie Company had trained extensively for mechanized warfare, rapid armored advances against conventional military forces. Instead, we found ourselves conducting presence patrols through urban environments against an enemy that refused to present itself as a traditional military target. The Bradley fighting vehicle, designed for the fulcrum of Cold War confrontation on the plains of Europe, had been awkwardly repurposed for counterinsurgency operations in narrow city streets. Its heavy firepower and armor protection made it a reassuring platform for urban operations, but its limited visibility, size, and devastating weaponry created constant tension when operating among civilian populations. As the Bradley gunner, I occupied a peculiar position within this dilemma. My primary weapon, the 25mm chain gun, was designed to destroy armored vehicles and enemy positions at ranges up to 2,000 meters. In the confines of Ramadi's congested neighborhoods, such a weapon could wreak havoc far beyond intended targets. The devastating power at my fingertips existed in perpetual conflict with the restrictive rules of engagement that governed our operations. Lieutenant Parker outlined those rules during our pre-deployment training at Fort Stewart. The ROE are designed to help you make split-second decisions while upholding our values, he explained to the assembled company. They're not just legal cover for the brass, they're what separates us from the insurgents. Those words seemed straightforward in the controlled environment of training. In practice, the rules became increasingly complex and contradictory as our deployment progressed. The first real test came 3 weeks after our arrival in Ramadi. Our patrol was moving along Route Michigan, a major thoroughfare that had seen frequent IED attacks. Staff Sergeant Miller, our Bradley commander, spotted a man digging by the roadside at 0430 hours. Possible IED emplacer, 10 o'clock 200 meters, he reported. Lieutenant Parker, commanding the lead vehicle, ordered us to hold position while he assessed the situation. Rules of engagement, people, he reminded us over the radio. We need PID before engaging. Positive identification, confirmation that the target represents a genuine threat, was a cornerstone of our ROE. But from 200 meters, in the pre-dawn darkness, through thermal sights that rendered everything in ghostly green hues, such certainty was nearly impossible. He's got something in his hands, Miller observed. Could be a shovel, could be a detonator. Hold fire, Parker ordered. We'll move closer and illuminate. As our Bradley advanced, the man by the roadside suddenly dropped what he was holding and fled into a nearby residential area. We were left with an uncertain outcome, a possible IED emplacement interrupted, but no confirmation, no detainee, and no certainty about what we'd prevented. If anything, later that same day, an IED strike on another company's patrol killed 2 soldiers and wounded 4. It had been planted along the same route, less than a kilometer from where we'd seen the suspicious digger. The incident established a pattern that would repeat throughout our deployment, moments where strict adherence to ROE seemed to handicap our effectiveness, leaving us vulnerable to an enemy unburdened by such constraints. We had him in our sights, Miller said bitterly that evening. If this was World War II, we'd have dropped him without hesitation. Different war, different rules, I replied, though the words rang hollow even to my own ears. By April, our company had weathered 14 IED attacks and 3 complex ambushes. We'd lost 3 soldiers killed and 11 wounded. The frustration among the troops was palpable, a sense that we were fighting with one hand tied behind our backs against an enemy who recognized and exploited this limitation. The insurgents had clearly adapted their tactics to leverage our ROE against us. They began using civilian areas as shields for their operations, positioning snipers in mosques, storing weapons in schools, and firing from positions surrounded by families. They understood that American forces were bound by constraints they could freely ignore. They're using our decency as a weapon, Specialist Wilson observed after we took fire from an apartment building we couldn't engage due to uncertain civilian presence. Lieutenant Parker, overhearing this, pulled several of us aside. The ROE aren't a weakness, he insisted. They're essential to our mission. We're not just here to kill insurgents. We're here to help build a stable Iraq. Every civilian we harm, accidentally or not, creates 10 new insurgents. His words made sense intellectually, but the emotional reality of watching friends die while potential threats escaped due to legal technicalities created a corrosive effect on morale. The rules seemed increasingly disconnected from the reality of combat in Ramadi's chaotic urban landscape. Then came the incident with Rodriguez. Private First Class Eduardo Rodriguez was our Bradley's driver, a 19-year-old from Miami, with an infectious laugh and pictures of his girlfriend taped to his station. On May 12th, our patrol was following a route we'd traveled numerous times before, adhering to the predictable patterns established in our operational orders. The IED that killed him was planted at a choke point we'd passed through a dozen times previously, a narrow section of road between a concrete wall and a drainage ditch that forced vehicles to slow down. Despite our Bradley's substantial armor, the explosively formed penetrator punched through the hull exactly where Rodriguez was sitting. He died instantly. The rest of us escaped with minor injuries and the haunting memory of his absence in the vehicle. During the unit debriefing, The company executive officer noted that maintaining unpredictable patterns of movement was part of our counter-IED procedures. Yet our operational orders frequently required us to follow set routes at set times, to maintain presence in specific areas. Another contradiction between policy and survival. "We're asked to be unpredictable on a schedule," Miller remarked darkly. "It doesn't work that way." The loss of Rodriguez hardened something in many of us. The theoretical debate about ROE versus tactical necessity became viscerally personal. Each patrol afterward carried the weight of his absence, along with the nagging question, would a more aggressive posture have prevented his death? By June, subtle changes were occurring in how we interpreted and applied the rules of engagement. Nothing officially changed in the written directives, but our implementation began to reflect the harsh education of combat experience. We developed a heightened suspicion of behavior that previously might have seemed innocent. The threshold for what constituted a hostile act or hostile intent, the legal prerequisites for engagement, seemed to lower almost imperceptibly. "Lieutenant," Parker noticed this shift and addressed it during a patrol briefing. "I understand we're all affected by what happened to Rodriguez," he said, his voice steady but empathetic. "But we cannot allow grief to corrupt our discipline. The ROE exists to protect both the civilian population and our moral integrity as soldiers. Once we lose that, we've lost everything." His words resonated, but reality continued to test our commitment to these principles. A week later, our patrol was moving through a neighborhood that intelligence had flagged as a hotspot for insurgent activity. I was scanning rooftops and windows through the Bradley's thermal sight when I spotted a man on a rooftop with what appeared to be a long cylindrical object, potentially an RPG tube. "Possible RPG, building to the right, rooftop," I reported. To Miller, "Can you confirm it's a weapon?" he asked, following protocol. I adjusted the magnification, trying to get a clearer image. "Cylindrical object, right length and profile for an RPG, but I cannot 100% confirm." Miller relayed this to Lieutenant Parker in the lead vehicle. The response came back immediately. "Hold fire unless he demonstrates hostile intent." 30 seconds later, as I continued tracking the figure, he raised the object to his shoulder, pointing it in the direction of our patrol. "He's aiming at us," I shouted, finger tensing on the trigger. "Engage," Miller ordered. I fired a 3-round burst from the 25mm. The high-explosive rounds obliterated the rooftop position. Later investigation revealed the man had indeed been carrying an RPG-7 launcher, but he'd also been positioned among satellite dishes and TV antennas that were destroyed in the engagement, civilian infrastructure rather than military targets. The after-action review noted that the engagement was justified under ROE since the subject had demonstrated clear hostile intent. Yet Parker pulled me aside afterward. "You made the right call," he said quietly. "But I need to know, would you have taken that shot a month ago before Rodriguez?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to insist that nothing had changed, that I'd always have recognized and responded to the threat exactly the same way. But honesty compelled a different answer. "I don't know, sir," I admitted. "Maybe I would have waited another few seconds to be absolutely certain." He nodded, neither approving nor condemning. "Just be aware of how your perspective is shifting. Once that line starts moving, it's hard to find it again." That conversation stayed with me through subsequent patrols. I began consciously examining my threat assessments, trying to distinguish between legitimate tactical caution and the kind of hair-trigger reactivity that could lead to tragedy. The balance was never perfect. Combat doesn't allow for philosophical precision, but the awareness itself felt like a necessary counterweight. Which brings me back to that technical with the PKM, firing at our convoy from a position deliberately chosen to maximize civilian presence. My decision to target the vehicle rather than the gunner wasn't just about following ROE. It reflected an evolving personal understanding of the impossible line we walked in Iraq. After that engagement, as our patrol returned to base, Lieutenant Parker approached me during the vehicle maintenance period. "You hesitated when that technical opened up on us," he said, not as an accusation but an observation. "Yes, sir. Civilians behind the target. Your hesitation could have gotten people killed if that RPG had connected." "Yes, sir." He leaned against the Bradley's armor, suddenly looking exhausted. The thing about rules of engagement, Reeves, is that they're trying to impose order on the most chaotic human activity imaginable. There's no perfect solution, just least bad options. How do we know which option is least bad, sir? I asked. That's the burden we carry, he replied. You make the best call you can with the information available in that split second. Then you live with it afterward. In the months that followed, our unit faced countless similar situations. Moments where the clear directives of the ROE collided with the messy reality of counterinsurgency warfare. We lost more soldiers. We prevented attacks. We detained insurgents. We accidentally targeted civilians. Each incident existed in its own moral universe, distinct yet connected to the larger pattern of our deployment. By the time our tour ended in January 2006, I had fired the Bradley's main gun 73 times in combat. Each engagement represented a moment of decision, a split-second calculation balancing tactical necessity, legal requirements, moral considerations, and survival instinct. Some decisions I remain confident in. Others haunt my quieter moments, raising unanswerable questions about roads not taken. What I learned in those 11 months in Iraq was that the contrast between rules of engagement and survival isn't really a contrast at all. It's a continuum we navigate with each decision. The rules exist not as abstract limitations but as guidelines for maintaining our humanity in circumstances designed to strip it away. Sometimes following them endangers us physically. Sometimes breaking them endangers us spiritually. The true skill of a soldier in counterinsurgency isn't marksmanship or tactical movement, though both are essential. It's the capacity to make impossibly complex ethical decisions under extreme pressure, then wake up the next day and do it again. It's finding that line between necessary force and unnecessary harm, then holding it against both external threats and internal fears. Years later, when people ask about my time in Iraq, they often want stories of firefights and dramatic engagements. I could tell them about the technical with the PKM, or dozens of similar incidents. But what defined that deployment wasn't the moments of contact. It was the constant, grinding pressure of knowing that each decision carried weight beyond its immediate tactical outcome. In the end, the rules of engagement weren't just legal parameters. They were a daily referendum on who we were as soldiers and as human beings. The line between them and survival wasn't fixed, but constantly redrawn in real time, patrol after patrol, engagement after engagement. Finding that line, holding it, adjusting it without losing it entirely. That was the true battle we fought in Iraq, one that continued long after we returned home. Staff Sergeant James Connor, 28 years old, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division, born in Syracuse, New York. The street seemed too quiet. That was always the first sign. The hollow echo of our boots against concrete was the only sound breaking the midday silence. Fallujah had a pulse, a rhythm you could feel after enough time in this godforsaken city. Today, that rhythm was off. I raised my fist, signaling the squad to halt. 8 Marines froze in position, weapons ready, eyes scanning rooftops and windows. The hair on my neck stood up. Someone was watching us. Movement 2nd floor, building on the right, Martinez whispered through the radio. I didn't turn to look. Looking got you killed. Instead, I kept my eyes forward, scanning the street ahead as I processed what this meant. We were being set up. The kill zone was already established. We were standing in it. The crack of a sniper rifle shattered the silence. Hernandez dropped beside me, screaming and clutching his thigh. Blood pumped between his fingers as the sound of the shot bounced between buildings, making it impossible to pinpoint. Then came the second shot, and the third, and suddenly hell erupted all around us. 2 weeks earlier, our convoy had rolled into Fallujah under the scorching April sun. Operation Vigilant Resolve, they called it. The brass said we were going to pacify the city, root out insurgents, establish order. What they didn't say was that we'd be fighting an enemy who disappeared into the population like ghosts. who knew every alley and crawl space in a city they'd lived in their entire lives. I remember standing in the back of our 7-ton as we passed the Welcome to Fallujah sign riddled with bullet holes. Martinez was beside me, a 19-year-old, Lance Corporal from El Paso who'd never seen combat before. "Hey, Staff Sergeant, is it true what they say about this place?" he asked, eyes wide beneath his helmet. "What's that, Martinez?" "That it's the city of mosques, but now they call it the city of death." I looked at the urban sprawl ahead. Tan, buildings stretching toward a hazy horizon, minarets punctuating the skyline like accusing fingers pointed at heaven. "Focus on your sector, Marine. Keep your head on a swivel." Our battalion had been tasked with clearing the northeastern section of the city, block by block, building by building, the slowest, most dangerous kind of warfare imaginable. By 0800 the next morning, we were moving through narrow streets, the temperature already climbing past 90 degrees. The first 3 days were deceptively quiet. Occasional pot shots from rooftops, nothing serious. We cleared dozens of buildings, found weapons caches, detained several military-aged males with suspicious calluses on their trigger fingers. Standard procedure, but there was a tension building, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. On the 4th day, everything changed. Alpha Company was hit hard in the Market District. An IED followed by a complex ambush. 4 KIA, 11 wounded. The insurgents were getting bolder, more coordinated. They'd studied our patterns, learned our tactics, and they had home field advantage. That night, huddled in our temporary command post, a gutted 2-story residence that smelled of cordite and rotting. "Garbage," Captain Reynolds laid out new orders. "3rd Platoon will push through these 3 blocks tomorrow," he said, pointing to the map spread across a wobbly table. "Intelligence suggests heavy insurgent activity. We're looking at multiple fighting positions, probable IEDs, possible tunnel network." I studied the map, memorizing the layout. 3 blocks of dense urban terrain, narrow streets connecting alleyways, hundreds of potential hiding spots. "What about civilians, sir?" I asked. Reynolds' face hardened. "Most have fled. Anyone still there has chosen to stay." No one said what we were all thinking, or their insurgents themselves. "We move at 0600, Reynolds concluded. "Staff Sergeant Connor, your squad has point..." Sleep came in fitful bursts that night. The distant crack of gunfire and thump of explosions created a macabre lullaby. I dozed with my rifle across my chest, dreaming of shadows that moved independently of their owners. At 0530, I roused my squad. 8 Marines, each, carrying between 60 and 80 pounds of gear. Body armor, ammunition, water, medical supplies, communication equipment. The basics of survival in this concrete hell. "Listen up," I said, keeping my voice low as they gathered around me. "Today we're pushing through the Alascari neighborhood. 3 blocks, heavy resistance expected. Martinez, you're on point. Hernandez and Williams, you'll be checking for IEDs. Jackson, you've got the saw. The rest of you, standard formation. Questions?" They stared back at me with that 1,000-yard gaze that develops after weeks in combat. No questions. They knew the drill. Remember, this isn't like training. These bastards have had years to prepare. Every window is a potential sniper position. Every pile of trash could be hiding an IED. Every civilian could be carrying a grenade. Trust nothing. Suspect everything. We moved out at exactly 0600, joining the rest of 3rd Platoon as we pushed into the neighborhood. The early morning call to prayer echoed from distant minarets, an eerie soundtrack to our advance. The streets were empty. Too empty. "I don't like this, Staff Sergeant," Martinez muttered as he checked corners with his rifle. "Nobody likes this, Martinez," I replied. "Just keep moving." The first block went smoothly. We cleared 6 buildings, finding nothing but abandoned homes. Dishes still on tables, clothes still in closets, lives interrupted. It was midway through the 2nd block when things went sideways. Martinez had just signaled the all-clear for a narrow alleyway when the world exploded. The blast threw me against a wall, my ears ringing, dust filling my lungs. Through the haze, I saw Martinez sprawled on the ground, his left leg a mangled mess. "Corpsman up!" I screamed, scrambling toward him. Doc Peterson was there in seconds, applying a tourniquet while I established a security perimeter with the rest of the squad. Martinez's face had gone ash gray, his eyes wide with shock. "Am I gonna lose it, Doc?" he gasped. "Not today, Marine," Peterson replied, working quickly. "Just another scar to impress the ladies back home." That's when the shooting started. First from the rooftops to our right, then from windows to our left. Classical ambush technique, IED to stop the patrol, then fire from multiple directions. We dove for whatever cover we could find. Doorways, abandoned vehicles, piles of rubble. "Jackson, suppress that rooftop," I ordered. "Williams, get smoke out." Jackson opened up with the saw, the heavy machine gun chewing into the roofline, where muzzle flashes betrayed enemy positions. Williams threw smoke grenades, the white clouds providing some concealment as Doc dragged Martinez to cover. "Connor, what's your situation?" Captain Reynolds' voice crackled over the radio. "Taking fire from multiple positions, sir. 1 WIA. Request immediate support." "Roger that. Second squad is moving to your position. Hang tight." Hanging tight meant surviving the next 15 minutes in a kill box. I keyed my radio to the squad frequency. "Listen up. We need to move to that building on the corner. Solid stone, good firing positions. Jackson and Thompson, you'll lay down suppressing fire. The rest of us will move in two-man teams. Doc, you and Davis take Martinez first." The firefight intensified as we executed the movement. Bullets snapped overhead and chipped away at the concrete around us. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with dust and sweat. Time compressed and expanded strangely. Seconds felt like hours. Yet everything happened in a blur. We made it to the building, kicked in the door, and established a hasty defense. Second squad linked up with us 10 minutes later. And together, we pushed back, clearing the buildings the insurgents had fired from. But they were gone, melted away into the labyrinth of the city, leaving only brass casings and bloodstains. Martinez was evacuated to the field hospital. He'd keep his leg, but his war was over. The rest of us pushed on. We had 2 more blocks to clear. The following days blurred together. Each morning we'd push forward. Each day brought new firefights, new IEDs, new casualties. We learned to spot the signs. Freshly disturbed dirt in the road, wires peeking from rubble, unusual objects that didn't belong. We learned that children watching us too intently often meant spotters were nearby. We learned that the sudden absence of normal sounds, birds, distant voices, the ever-present generators, usually preceded an attack. Sleep became luxury. 4 hours a night if we were lucky, often interrupted by mortar fire or the need to rotate guard duty. We ate standing up, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Some men stopped talking altogether, communicating only through nods and hand signals. The constant vigilance wore on us all. By the 3rd week, paranoia had become our closest companion. We shot at shadows. We flinched at backfiring vehicles. We trusted no one. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. And then came that quiet street. Too quiet. As Hernandez went down from the sniper's bullet, training took over. "Contact right," I shouted, diving for cover behind an abandoned taxi. "Return fire. 2nd floor windows." Our squad opened up, pouring rounds into the suspected shooter positions. The air filled with the deafening chatter of M4s and the heavier punch of Jackson's saw. "Thompson, get Hernandez," I yelled, laying down suppressing fire as Thompson darted out, grabbed Hernandez by his plate carrier, and dragged him behind a concrete barrier. Doc was already moving toward them when the second phase of the ambush kicked in. 2 RPGs streaked from a rooftop across the street, exploding against the building behind us. Chunks of masonry rained down as the shockwave rolled over us. "We've got shooters on the rooftops," Williams called out. "At least 4 positions." I grabbed the radio. "Brass key. This is Echo 3 actual. We are in heavy contact. Multiple. Enemy positions. Request immediate support. Over. Echo 3. This is Brass key. Support is inbound. Hang tight. Over. Hang tight." Same words as before. Same impossible task. I looked around at my Marines, faces streaked with sweat and dust, eyes alert and focused despite the chaos. They were waiting for me to make a decision, to find a way out of this kill box. "Williams, Thompson," I need you to push to that corner building, I ordered, pointing to a 3-story structure at the intersection ahead. Get eyes on those rooftops. Jackson, Davis, you're going to lay down suppressing fire while they move. The rest of us will leapfrog forward once they're in position. It was a desperate plan, but staying put meant certain death. The insurgents had us dialed in. Williams and Thompson made their move, sprinting across the open street as Jackson and Davis hammered the enemy positions. They'd almost reached the building when Williams stumbled, a spray of blood erupting from his shoulder. Thompson grabbed him, practically carrying him the final few meters to cover. Williams is hit but mobile. Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. We made it to the building. First floor clear. Moving up to get eyes on rooftops. I waited, counting seconds that felt like years as bullets continued to snap and whine around our position. Doc was working on Hernandez, whose face had gone pale from blood loss. Connor, we've got eyes on, Thompson reported. 4 shooters on the roof at your 2 o'clock, 2 more on the balcony at your 11. They've got a machine gun set. Up. Before I could respond, the distinctive sound of Cobra attack helicopters cut through the gunfire. 2 AH-1 whiskeys appeared overhead, their presence immediately drawing fire from the insurgents. Echo 3, this is Venom 6, a new voice said on the radio. Looks like you boys could use some help. Mark your position, over. I popped a yellow smoke grenade. Yellow smoke is us, Venom 6. Enemy positions on rooftops to our north and northwest. Roger that. Stand by. The Cobras opened up, their 20mm cannons hammering the insurgent positions with devastating accuracy. The heavy machine gun fell silent. The RPGs stopped, but sporadic small arms fire continued from other buildings. Echo 3. Be advised we have enemy moving through buildings to your east, Venom 6 reported. Looks like they're trying to flank you. Copy that, I replied. Can you engage? Negative. Too close to your position and we're running low on fuel. Second platoon is 3 minutes out from your location. We needed to move now, before the flanking force cut us off. I looked at Hernandez, who was now conscious but unable to walk. Doc, will he make it if we move him? Peterson nodded grimly. We don't have a choice, Staff Sergeant. All right, listen up, I said to the remaining Marines. We're pushing to Thompson and Williams' position. Davis and I will carry Hernandez. Jackson, you've got rear security. We move on my mark. We made it to the corner building just as second platoon arrived, engaging the insurgents who had been trying to flank us. The firefight continued for another 45 minutes before the enemy finally melted away, leaving us with 2 wounded and a block still to clear. Hernandez and Williams were evacuated. The rest of us pushed on, room by room, building by building. By nightfall, our objective was secured, but the cost had been high. Too high. That night, as I sat cleaning my rifle in the relative safety of our new command post, Captain Reynolds found me. You did good today, Connor, he said quietly. Got your men out alive. I looked up at him, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. 2 of them barely, sir. That's 2 who wouldn't have made it without your leadership. He paused. Reports say there were at least 15 insurgents in that ambush. Professional job, probably foreign fighters. I nodded silently, continuing to clean my weapon. The rhythmic motion was therapeutic, keeping the thoughts at bay. Get some rest, Reynolds said. We push again at 0600. As he walked away, I reassembled my rifle, checked the action, and set it beside my sleeping bag. Tomorrow would bring more narrow streets, more shadowy windows, more uncertainty. The paranoia would remain our constant companion, keeping us alive in this city of ghosts. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I saw Martinez's mangled leg, heard Hernandez's screams, felt the pressure wave of the RPGs. And I wondered, as I did every night, if this block-by-block battle would ever truly be won, or if we were just fighting shadows that would always return once we moved on. The distant sound of gunfire provided the only answer Fallujah ever gave. Tomorrow would be another day of watching, waiting, and fighting an enemy we could rarely see but always feel. One. Or if we were just fighting shadows that would always return once we moved on. The distant sound of gunfire provided the only answer Fallujah ever gave. Tomorrow would be another day of watching, waiting, and fighting an enemy we could rarely see but always feel.